AltPreset. So they voiced their concerns and raised awareness using valid criticism. And guess what? It worked! Jeff Fowler, the director for the upcoming Sonic movie, had this to say. "Thank you for the support and the criticism. The message is loud and clear. You aren't happy with the design and you want changes. It's going to happen. Everyone at Paramount and Sega are fully committed to making this character the best he can be. That is all criticism aims to achieve, to make the source of the criticism the best that it can be." When you walk into a restaurant, what do you expect? You expect to be seated promptly and for your servers to be courteous. Are you entitled for having these expectations? No, because the restaurant is providing you a service that you are paying money for. So the next time someone calls you entitled for criticizing a product or service that you pay money for, remember this. They do not know what the word entitled means, and they have nothing better to do than to criticize your criticism with criticism. Staying silent or pretending that the game is in good shape when it actually is not is way more harmful than criticism will ever be. Well you guys, that's it for this video. I apologize if I missed your Pokemon PBR suggestion down in the comments. There were just way too many comments to sort through them all. To avoid this problem in the future, make sure to include hashtag PBR followed by the name of the Pokemon that you want to be in the PBR footage. That will allow me to sort through all suggested comments with Control F to help me actually find your comment. Stay tuned for part 3, and always remember, don't settle for less, fight for more. Thanks for watching, you guys. For those unaware of what has transpired recently, a person named Fusa accused Masuda, the producer for Pokemon Sword and Shield, of various grotesque and explicit sexual deviances. The claims were comically bogus and were disregarded almost immediately by anyone who read them. The Twitmonger account was banned, and even though Fusa is a sick and depraved human being, that should have been the end of it. Or so you would think. In an obvious attempt at maliciously targeting the National Dex movement, Fusa plugged the hashtag #BringBackNationalDex right under their blatant, fictitious accusations. And now people are somehow convinced that the entire Pokemon fanbase as a collective are as sick and depraved as Fusa. The people convinced that Fusa is a Pokemon fan who is so disturbed by the lack of a National Dex that he has the brilliant idea to slander Masuda are as dense, naive, and gullible as the people who actually believed in Fusa's depraved fiction to begin with. Treating Fusa as anything other than a desperate and sick individual means Fusa successfully deceived you. If you think about this logically, Fusa's intentions become transparent. Fusa could have just as easily made a story about Donald Trump and then plugged in hashtag #NotMyPresident. The obscene lack of credibility in Fusa's words would be the same. Fusa would be condemned and then completely ignored. Yet people, for some reason, are eating this up, and they actually believe Fusa did all of this as a result of some missing Pokemon in Sword and Shield. Come on, you guys. Think. Obviously, the true intentions behind the stunt are more insidious in nature. Fusa had two objectives in mind: to take shots at Masuda, which failed miserably, and to tarnish the integrity of the National Dex movement in a false flag attack. A genuine person who truly wanted the return of the National Dex wouldn't resort to such stupidity. Only a random Joe off the streets with no consideration for the well-being of Pokemon, or someone opposed to their being critical about Pokemon Sword and Shield, would sink low enough to attempt something as shallow as this. Fusa succeeded in one of their objectives, to defame the National Dex movement, and to convince dense, naive, and gullible people that Fusa is somehow credible enough to be perceived as a legitimate Pokemon fan. They're literally just using the situation to shame the dude because he won't give them what they want because they're cutting some Pokemon from the game. This person truly believes that a Pokemon fan went out of their way to produce an extremely unconvincing piece of depraved fiction in order to bring back cut Pokemon, knowing full well doing something like that would have the inverse effect due to the obvious backlash. But they continue. They accuse him of rape, then follow up with hashtag #BringBackTheNational. Yes, because that statement alone doesn't strike you as completely odd or suspicious in any way. It's the same thing if someone accuses someone of rape and then immediately plugs their Twitter handle right after. Obviously, the person has a hidden agenda that is ironically clear as day. This pitiful fan base reached the point where they are making fake accounts and accusing Masuda of crimes. This guy is holding the entire Pokemon fanbase accountable for one random person's clearly malicious intentions that should be immediately disregarded, condemned, and then forgotten. Instead, he took the bait and believed in the fictitious narrative that Fusa laid out for him. I hope they never put back the National Dex ever again after this. Wiping National Dex from history. It's time. This is exactly what Fusa wanted, to turn the love people have for the National Dex into hatred. Nothing with regards to Fusa is credible. Everything and anything that person has said is a fabrication, including the illusion that Fusa is somehow concerned with the exclusion of Pokemon from a game. Fusa is a liar, Fusa was not sexually assaulted, and Fusa doesn't care about the National Dex, or even Pokemon for that matter. If you think otherwise, Fusa has succeeded in deceiving you. Fusa is not associated with Pokemon or its fandom in any way except for attempting to slander Masuda, the National Dex movement, and the Pokemon fanbase as a whole. I hope this video clears up any misconceptions with regards to the situation. Sexual assault is obviously not okay, but stating false accusations of sexual assault is just as bad. So don't do either of these two things and you'll get pretty far in life. Thanks for watching, you guys. I see comments like these all the time. You're complaining about the animations not having enough quality. Complaining about something that has little effect on the gameplay is dumb. How about generating discussion on something important that the game lacks? Keyword, important. Yes, the animations are literally the least important part. They claim animations for the Pokemon are not important, when the animations are the only thing that bring the Pokemon to life. The animations breathe soul and personality into the Pokemon models, and that, in turn, allows them to be more expressive. But instead of trying to explain to you guys with words why animations are important, I will instead show you exactly what I'm talking about. I've noticed in the comments that a lot of you guys never got the chance to play Pokemon Battle Revolution, or PBR for short. In fact, a large majority of you have no idea what PBR even is. Coming across all these comments, it dawned on me with the realization of why many of you are so complacent with bland, low-quality animation. If you were hand-fed garbage from a young age, and you grew up eating garbage, you would think that garbage tastes pretty good. But the second you're introduced to high-quality food, you'll realize that garbage actually tastes really bad. The logic behind this analogy can also be applied to animation. If you are only aware of the low-quality animations found in Game Freak games and have nothing to compare them to, you'll begin to presume that the Game Freak animations look pretty good, when in reality they are heavily lacking in quality, and most of them are absent of expression, even though Game Freak claims otherwise. The word expression has been tossed around a lot, but we haven't really explored what expression and expressiveness actually mean. We are going to compare idle animations found in Pokemon Battle Revolution for the Wii to the Game Freak idle animations that have been present in every single one of their games for the past 6 years. As a friendly reminder, all of these Game Freak animations that you are about to see will be present in Sword and Shield, because they are ripping all of these animations. That's of course assuming that the Pokemon Showcase are even in the game, because there's no National Dex. This is Kecleon's idle animation from Pokemon Battle Revolution. Right off the bat, you can see that Kecleon is chock full of expression just from the twitchy and eccentric movements that it makes. Sonority, the developers of Pokemon Battle Revolution, did an excellent job of conveying the twitchy eye movements of an actual chameleon into Kecleon's idle animation. The overall impression of Kecleon's idle animation gives off the sense that it has a sporadic personality. Now let's take a look at Game Freak's Kecleon idle animation in comparison. So yeah, that's Game Freak's animation. They stripped Kecleon of all of his personality, all of his expression, and they replaced it with literally nothing. If you take a look again at the PBR animation, you can see that there's a lot going on here. Kecleon has the twitchy head movements. He also moves his arms in a circular pattern. He moves his hips and his legs to convey some kind of funky dance. The fleshy part on the top of his head also moves when he flicks his head, and he also slightly opens his mouth near the end of the animation. If we go back to the Game Freak of Kecleon, you'll notice that he's a lot more static. This static-like posture is what I'm referring to when I mention that Game Freak's animations are of lower quality with less expression. It's really hard to bring out Kecleon's personality when it's just standing there. Game Freak has seen what Genius Sonority has done. They actually have an animation in here that is inspired by what Genius Sonority did. Take a look at this. Would you look at that? Kecleon is actually alive. Game Freak took inspiration from Genius Sonority's twitchy head movement. I'm not even sure if this animation is seen in the games anywhere. My first time seeing this animation was when I loaded up all the animations on my computer. But as you can see, Game Freak is clearly capable of animating their Pokemon. This animation isn't nearly as good as the PBR animation, but it's still a lot better than nothing. This animation serves as a much better idle animation than the one that Game Freak rendered. There's yet another example of an animation that is better than the idle animation that Game Freak ended up with. Take a look at this. I believe this animation is from Pokemon MEG and has Kecleon swaying back and forth. This animation makes Kecleon seem a lot more playful and a lot more carefree. Game Freak has all of these animation assets, so I cannot fathom why they decided to go with such a static idle animation. Is it apathy? Is it incompetence? I really don't know. Pickle Cool Breeze doesn't care about Pokemon expressiveness. Pickle condones and approves of Kecleon going from this to this. Why does Pickle condone this neglect of poor Kecleon? Well, it's either gotta be ignorance or poor taste. Next up is Starmie. Starmie always had a really cool idle animation. All of its appendages move freely from one another, and its star in the back spins around. Starmie's idle animation gives off the impression that it's very fast, and it also gives off the impression that Starmie is just a cool Pokemon overall. Let's take a look at Game Freak Starmie and see how it stands up. It just stands there, lifeless, devoid of expression, personality, and soul of any kind. Starmie is another classic case of Game Freak hype. That's a condition where a Pokemon is stripped of its personality and can no longer be expressive. Now I know what you're gonna say, but Distant Kingdom is over 800 Pokemon. It's way too hard for Game Freak to animate Starmie's star move. Oh, I'm sorry. Way too hard to do what now? That's right, Game Freak has already animated Starmie's star movement. Starmie's star spins in 3 separate animations. This one, which I believe is from Pokemon MEG. This one is when Starmie is summoned from the Pokeball. And then it spins in this crazy running animation. Game Freak has the tools, they have the time, they have the staff, and they have the capabilities to animate these Pokemon. Game Freak just makes very odd decisions. A lot of these Pokemon MEG animations are extremely detailed, and a lot of them are of high quality. But when it comes to the battle animations, like the idle animation or the damage animation, the animation quality is this, which is odd because the player spends half the game doing Pokemon battles. So you would think that the animations found in Pokemon battles would be of higher quality than animations found in Pokemon MEG, which is an optional side method. But Game Freak did the exact opposite. The saddest part about Starmie is that Game Freak used to care. Game Freak animated Starmie's star moving in its Pokemon Crystal sprite on the Game Boy Color all the way back in the year 2000. Game Freak also animated Starmie's star spinning in its idle animation of its sprite in black and white on the DS all the way back in 2010. Just take a minute to let all of that sink in. Richard Noggin doesn't care about Pokemon expressiveness. Richard Noggin condones and approves of Starmie going from this to this. Why did Richard condone this neglect of poor Starmie? Well, it's either gotta be ignorance or poor taste. Hariyama's design is inspired by sumo wrestling. The yellow cloth-like object on Hariyama is inspired by the sumo wrestler belt called Kesho Mawashi. Sumo wrestlers are also typically on the heavier side because the heavier you are, the easier it is to push someone out of the ring. That's why Hariyama is so thick. So, with all that in mind, Genius Sonority, being the geniuses that they are, no pun intended, based Hariyama's idle animation off of the sumo wrestler's stomp, called Shiko. Shiko is used as a training exercise and is also performed as a ritual to drive demons away. Hariyama's idle animation really complements its design, and further accentuates its personification of being a sumo wrestler. Let's see how Game Freak handled Hariyama. It just stands there, lifeless, devoid of expression, personality, and soul of any kind. If you haven't noticed a pattern, Game Freak's animations use little to no animations at all. That is exactly why these animations are considered low quality animations. They're not really animated. The models are almost completely static. I know what you're gonna say, but Distant Kingdom, there's over 800 Pokemon. It's way too hard for Game Freak to animate Hariyama doing a sumo wrestler stomp. Oh, I'm sorry. It's too hard to do what now? Game Freak has already went out of their way and animated a lot of these Pokemon. They have access to these animation assets. They just choose not to use them. Captain Knuckles doesn't care about Pokemon expressing. Captain Knuckles condones and approves of Hariyama going from this to this. Why does Captain Knuckles condone this neglect of poor Hariyama? Well, it's either gotta be ignorance or poor taste. I hope this video helped to clarify what the terms expression and quality mean with regards to animation. Animation is important because it brings the Pokemon to life. It flushes out their personality, which allows them to be more expressive. If you believe that Pokemon shouldn't have the ability to be more expressive, you honestly don't care about it. And you aren't a true Pokemon fan. Always remember, you guys, don't settle for less, fight for more. Thanks for watching.
But with the transition to the Nintendo Switch hardware, with its, it being much more powerful, allowing us to be much more expressive with each of the individual Pokemon. Allowing us to be much more expressive with each of the individual Pokemon.
implemented in a game on the Switch.
Okay, here's a Vaporeon model. This one on the right is from the 3DS games. The one on the left is from the Switch. The obvious difference here is the textures. They clearly look different, but if I just grab the model itself. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to make both models take up the same space, like they're taking up the same exact space. Turn on wireframe mode. So these two models are taking up the same exact space. If I were to move this model slightly, you'll see that all the details start to merge away from the old model. What I have selected? I have the Switch model selected right now. That's the one in orange. Let's reset the location. I still have it selected. But you can't really see any lines other than a few polygons that have flipped because of how Blender imports models. But if I just move it slightly, things start to unmerge really quickly because it's the same exact model. I'll prove it again by taking these apart again. Let's go into edit mode. Edit mode, this is the Switch model. Let's count the polygons. So we are at 5,540 tries. That's the try count for the Switch model. The 3DS model, select all, 5,540 tries. Okay, now how about this? Let's swap textures. This is the 3DS model with the Switch textures applied, except for the eyes and mouth. When I swapped the Switch textures onto the 3DS model, they map perfect because the UV maps are the same. They are the same. Let's find the UV map here. So here's the body UV for the body. The eyes and mouth are on their own different. Now for the Switch UVs, same thing. Let's select them both. If I select everything, they take up the same exact space. There are two overlapping sets of UVs here. Maps to the same exact texture. Or it would be this one. Here we go, that's the Switch texture. You don't just remake a model and get the same exact result. This is a conversion, not a remake. Not a remake. They didn't remake the model, they converted it.
I edited my last video because it was an interpretation of a mistranslation. The redundancies were removed in favor of preserving the only information that mattered anyways, which was the excellent demonstration by PJFed. It proved without a doubt that the Pokemon models found in Pokemon Let's Go for the Nintendo Switch are the exact same as the Pokemon models in the 3DS games. The models are already on the Switch. Now I'm just going to come out and say it. The models found in Sword and Shield are also the exact same as the models found in the 3DS games. Everyone and their mother all agreed the models were the same. Not a single person would refute this fact. The only reason people are changing their narrative now is due to an interview featuring Omori, the director for Sword and Shield, making a statement in a Famitsu article where he claimed they had to make the Pokemon models from scratch, even though everything revealed up to this point completely contradicts this statement. This video will prove that the statement is a lie, or it will expose Game Freak's unprecedented incompetence should the statement actually be proven true upon release. It's a lose-lose scenario for Game Freak. A Reddit user named Sleated released a proper translation just a few hours after I published my last video. He paid over $50 to get the statement professionally translated. It is the only translation I've seen so far that preserves the entire context and removes the ambiguity of the word model. Let's take a look. The interviewer starts off by asking Masuda and Omori about the Pokemon and how much work is involved with including them in Sword and Shield. Masuda reaffirms his stance on quality over quantity, and what Omori says next is where the controversy begins. He states, quote, Masuda and I had discussion after discussion about the issue. Even at the point when we were making Pokemon Sun and Moon, it was already practically very difficult to bring all Pokemon along into the game. But with the changing hardware to the Nintendo Switch and needing to redo the models again from scratch, we had to make a decision. The word model in this context is definitely referring to the Pokemon, more specifically the older Pokemon. Omori also conveniently omits any reason behind the decision to waste valuable time and resources to recreate models that look the exact same as models that they already have. With all that being said, let's get into proving the lie or exposing the gross incompetence of Game Freak. The Pokemon models are easily portable. There are many examples to prove this point. The models can be found on the 3DS, on cell phones, on anyone's computer, in an arcade machine in Ga-Ole, and yes, the models have already been proven to be successfully ported on the Nintendo Switch. People then begin to blame Sword and Shield as the reason why the models are rendered unusable. Allow me to introduce you to the concept known as conversion. 3D models are also convertible. I'll walk you through an example to prove my point. I have every single model, texture, and animation of every single Pokemon from Pokemon Sun and Moon ported onto my computer. I also have two different model viewing software that we will be using for this demonstration, Ohana 3DS and Spica. Let's assume that Ohana is Pokemon Let's Go, and let's treat Spica as Sword and Shield. Let's also assume that instead of those two games supporting the same type of models between them, Game Freak has, for some reason, decided they want to make the two Pokemon titles on the same console support different file formats. So let's go into Let's Go and load up a Pikachu model with a file format of .bin. As you can see, it loads up Pikachu with no problem. Now let's try and load up that exact same Pikachu model into Pokemon Sword and Shield. It gives us an unsupported file format error, which means it doesn't support .bin. Does this mean we just give up because now every model is running unusable and we should get to work on making them from scratch again? Of course not. We can simply convert the model. Let's go back into Let's Go and convert the model by exporting it as a different file format. Let's say that Sword and Shield supports the SMD format. We'll make a new folder titled Sword and Shield so we can easily locate our converted model. Let's go back into Sword and Shield and click Open. Let's look for the Sword and Shield folder where we put our converted model, and BAM! It worked. The model from Let's Go has been successfully converted, exported, and then imported into Sword and Shield. Both models are the exact same, one was just converted from the other. We didn't need to remake it from scratch because 3D models can be easily converted. If I'm able to convert Game Freak's Pokemon models in my home on my own personal computer, I'm assuming Game Freak and their team of professionals can do the exact same thing. Amori's statement only holds true if Game Freak is so insanely incompetent that they're incapable of doing a simple file conversion. I'm aware it's not always a simple one-to-one port or conversion in all cases. I have an example of that as well. When I first load Pikachu in Ohana, he's got some glaring texture mapping issues. After a few tweaks of about 5 minutes max, voila! Pikachu looks significantly better. This only took me 5 minutes as opposed to the 30+ hours of recreating Pikachu from scratch for no logical reason. Game Freak will of course run into hiccups along the way, but every alternative is better in every conceivable way and will always be faster and more efficient compared to remaking the models from scratch. Game Freak made the Pokemon models with the sole intention of using them outside of the 3DS, which we have already proven to be true. This is referred to as future-proofing the models. The Pokemon models were made with much higher quality than what would have been necessary for the 3DS. Before we get into the inherent quality of the models, I would like to highlight the distinction between the terms model and texture, since most uninformed people often use them interchangeably even though they're completely different. The model is the physical body of the character or thing. The texture is the skin or coat of paint that goes on top of the model. You can manipulate the texture without changing the model in any way. I'll show you a quick example. Let's say that we want to turn our Pikachu into a Ditto Tree. We just need to load up Pikachu's textures in any image editing software, make the edits to the texture, and then load the texture onto the model. We now have a Ditto Chew instead of a Pikachu. However, the model underneath is the exact same as the other Pikachu. Only Pikachu's texture was altered, not the model. If Omori claimed they needed to recreate textures from scratch, that would make a lot more sense, as opposed to recreating the physical model, which makes no sense at all. Model quality can actually be quantified by a numerical value. The polygon or triangle count is generally considered indicative of the quality of the model. These triangles form the 3D mesh of the model. The more triangles generally means the higher quality of the model. Take Mario from Super Mario 64 for example. He is comprised of a total of 838 triangles. Fast forward 21 years to Mario Odyssey, and now Mario is comprised of 14,375 triangles. 17 times more triangles than his N64 counterpart. We will use Odyssey Mario as a benchmark to see how some Pokemon models hold up. Furfrou with the heart haircut has 12,906 triangles. Mega Ampharos has 11,651 triangles. Buzzwole has 10,952 triangles. This is only 3 examples out of over 1,000 models that Game Freak has access to. As you can see, the Pokemon models are of sufficient quality, yet Game Freak claims they are remaking them from scratch despite already successfully porting them onto the Nintendo Switch. This is gross incompetence. The models look the exact same. They share an identical topology. Topology generally refers to the overall layout of the model. The Gyarados from the 3DS games shares an identical layout to the Dynamax Gyarados in Sword and Shield. I also wanted to point out that Dynamax is extremely easy to achieve as well. People believe that the models look the same because they're the same Pokemon. This is completely false. As you can see, you can have the same Pokemon share two completely different models. The Gardevoir on the left is from the Chinese mobile game, and the Gardevoir on the right is from Game Freak. You can immediately tell just by looking at it that both models are of Gardevoir, but they're both completely different models entirely. Here's another example with Pikachu, again with the Chinese model on the left and Game Freak model on the right. It's the same Pokemon and you know that it's Pikachu, but you can clearly see that the models are very different. Now I'm not saying that Game Freak can't make changes to their models. In Pokemon Let's Go, Game Freak modified the partner Pikachu model. They added more detail in Pikachu's face by giving it eye sockets and an actual mouth to help it be more expressive. The other Pikachu's mouth and eyes are simply a texture. When put side by side, you can easily see the modifications that Game Freak made. Even though the Let's Go Pikachu is modified, that doesn't mean Game Freak created it from scratch. The rest of the Pikachu model is the exact same, they just worked off of the existing model. If you have a car and you want to add a modification, you won't go and rebuild your car from scratch and then apply the modification on top of it. You wouldn't do that because that would be an extreme waste of time and effort and wouldn't make any sense at all. The same logic applies to the Pokemon models. It would be extremely easy to tell if the models were actually different. Let's take a look at the Gyarados example again. It's actually significantly harder to make a Gyarados from scratch to match up perfectly like this than it would be to make an actual new Gyarados model with noticeable differences. Game Freak would have to seriously go out of their way to make a convincing double of all of their models from scratch, just to trick people into believing they're the same. This would be considered gross incompetence. People that defend Game Freak's shortcomings usually state Game Freak has no time or resources to make a good game. Ironically enough, these are the same kinds of people who claim Game Freak now has both the time and resources to build high quality assets that they already have access to, from scratch, for no logical reason. These people fail to see this irony, and they also fail to acknowledge the level of incompetency that is required for a Omori's statement to be truthful. In fact, a lot of Game Freak defenders were relieved to hear the egregious news of the complete waste of time and resources, instead of being disgusted by the alleged incompetence. Xenochu's comment is the perfect example to show what I'm talking about. I know there's a lot of controversy surrounding this individual, but that's besides the point. Look at how Xenochu reacted after hearing the news that large portions of time and resources were being wasted on assets they already have. He first questions why they look the exact same. His reasoning for this is because they were recreated to look the same, not realizing that to achieve something like this is borderline impossible. Certainly not feasible, as many Game Freak supporters like to put it. After coming to the sad realization of this time and resource sink, he exclaims, "That explains a lot." Here, Xenochu is ironically referring to the poor quality found in Sword and Shield. He's admitting the game is a mess, and he finally found the perfect reason: severe incompetence. His whole comment comes off as a sigh of relief and jubilation, as opposed to disgust and bewilderment. To get my idea across to you guys, let's consider this bridge analogy. A bridge engineer builds a bridge to be future-proof, so that future generations can also use it. If the bridge fails, people don't flock to the engineer's side saying, "It's very hard to make a bridge," or "You don't know how to make a bridge, so you can't criticize them." No one does that. When the engineers fail at their job, the engineers are condemned, labeled incompetent and unfit for their job, and may even have their licenses revoked. Thankfully, Game Freak's incompetence doesn't actually put any lives at risk, but the same logic still applies. Game Freak is claiming their future-proofed bridges are now all magically broken and need to be rebuilt. When Game Freak fails at their job, the entire Pokemon community should be condemning Game Freak and labeling them as incompetent instead of actively looking for reasons that explains a lot. Reasons that are just excuses for the lack of quality found in Sword and Shield. Well, you guys, that about wraps up my thoughts on the situation. If you think Omori lied, or that Game Freak is incompetent, or that this whole situation is one giant misunderstanding, make sure to share those thoughts down below in the comment section. As always, don't settle for less, fight for more. Thanks for watching, you guys. This video will be focusing on the disaster known as Sky Battles, and the devastation it has had on several Pokemon idle animations that can still be seen even to this day. Sky Battles was just another classic Game Freak one-off gimmick that appeared in Pokemon X and Y, and was never seen in any game after that. The whole premise behind Sky Battles is that you fight random NPCs in a skybox. That's it. It's one of the more uninteresting gimmicks Game Freak has introduced, but it effectively butchered many idle animations in its wake. Sky Battles featured only a small pool of eligible Pokemon that consisted of flying-type Pokemon or Pokemon with the levitate ability. To produce the illusion that the Pokemon were in the air, Game Freak had to make all eligible Pokemon appear to be airborne. This wasn't an issue for the Pokemon with the levitate ability because, well, they levitate. The issue stems from the winged Pokemon. The logical solution to this obstacle would be to give all eligible winged Pokemon an additional, separate, flying animation, while retaining their grounded state animation for regular battles. But as we all know, Game Freak is quite illogical when it comes to basic things like this, so instead, Game Freak chose to have all eligible winged Pokemon remain airborne indefinitely, even though Sky Battles were completely removed after X and Y. Now at first you would think, well that's not so bad. Pokemon with wings use their wings now. That's not a problem, right? Right? Yeah, you would think so, but this is Game Freak we're talking about here. They're the masters of half measures and cut corners. So today we're going to take a look at the damage caused by Sky Battles.
Skarmory!
Here is Skarmory's idle animation found in Pokemon Battle Revolution. Skarmory is a really cool Pokemon. It's a metal bird. The concept isn't groundbreaking or anything, but Skarmory's overall design is executed very well, and the simple yet crucial animations found here really complement Skarmory as a territorial, savage, hardy bird Pokemon. It's crazy how a bird Pokemon becomes a more convincing and believable bird when given proper bird-like animations. It's funny how that works. Now I know you guys already had a small taste, but let's bring back up Game Freak's animation real quick. The first thing that you'll notice is that Skarmory doesn't use its wings at all. The wings are completely static, which begs the question how Skarmory is even flying, because for a bird to fly they need to flap their wings. Game Freak's idle animation of Skarmory has it breaking a basic law of physics. This shatters the illusion of life, significantly lowers the appeal of Skarmory, and makes Skarmory extremely unconvincing as a character. Skarmory looks less like a Pokemon and looks more like a lifeless puppet dangling from a string. Allow me to show you what an actual flying Skarmory looks like. That clip was taken from Pokemon Colosseum, a GameCube game that came out in 2003, over 16 years ago. Not only did Colosseum have its own region and its own story, much like the other Game Freak games, it also has way better animations than the ones found in Sword and Shield, which is really sad and pathetic when you think about it. The saddest part is that all the Pokemon featured in this video have a grounded state idle animation. This is what Skarmory looks like in Pokemon Ami. This animation is a lot worse than the one found in PBR because it's still completely static and lifeless. But it's way better than the idle animation that Game Freak went with. Skarmory is at least obeying the law of gravity, even though he's still devoid of life and personality. Here is an example of Game Freak properly animating Skarmory flapping its wings. Game Freak is clearly capable of animating their Pokemon, so I have no idea why they decided to go with the string Skarmory instead. Here is Tropius' idle animation in PBR. The way Tropius extends its neck and then retracts it has it come across as very hefty. There's also some nice secondary action of the bananas around Tropius' neck, producing the illusion of inertia. This simple action makes Tropius feel grounded and alive. His appeal is convincing enough to see Tropius as a real Pokemon. Let's see how Game Freak handled Tropius. Oh man, that's brutal. Once again, Game Freak has a winged Pokemon not flapping its wings to generate lift. Instead, they just have the Pokemon float indefinitely, which looks awful. I'll give Game Freak some credit here. There's some slight animation on Tropius' leaves which make it look like it's blowing in the wind. That's a nice touch. But that doesn't mean much when it's attached to a static, lifeless puppet of a character on strings. Here is an example of a proper animation of Tropius flying, found 16 years ago. Here is Tropius in Pokemon Ami. It's rather dull with almost no animation, but it's significantly better than the idle animation that Game Freak decided to go with. And here is an example of Game Freak properly animating their Pokemon. This is also way better than the T-pose Tropius. I have no idea why Game Freak thought that T-pose Tropius was a good idea.
Xatu!
Here is Xatu's idle animation in Pokemon Battle Revolution. Xatu is known as a Pokemon that literally doesn't move at all, yet Genius Sonori went out of their way to give Xatu some movement so that it appears alive. They also have some nice follow-through animation with the red appendage on the back of Xatu's head swaying, producing the illusion of inertia. What Game Freak did to Xatu is especially painful. They transformed the quiet, stoic, and calm demeanor of Xatu into a goofy-looking, lifeless husk of its former self. Here is an example of properly animated Xatu flight. My Xatu Pokemon Me idle animation was bugged out in my model viewer software, so I had to bust open the emulator. This animation, although minimalistic, would actually work for Xatu. The slight swaying back and forth really fits in with Xatu's personality.
Swallow!
Here is Swallow in Pokemon Battle Revolution. The animations aren't crazy or anything, but the simple bird-like movements have Swallow come across as a more convincing bird-like Pokemon. Let's bring up Game Freak's idol. Swallow is also a victim of not flapping its wings, and instead just levitating indefinitely. I appreciate the detail of the wings blowing in the wind, but I would appreciate it even more if the wings were actually flapping. That would be infinitely more convincing that Swallow is actually flying, as opposed to disobeying gravitation. Here is an example of Swallow properly animated 16 years ago in Pokemon Coliseum. Here is Swallow found in Pokemon Me, and here is Game Freak properly imitating bird flight. Salamence always looked very intimidating in Pokemon Battle Revolution. All jokes aside, Salamence always looked really cool. Let's see how Game Freak treated Salamence. Salamence, like the rest of the Pokemon, defies gravity with its static, motionless wings. Here is how G.SKill interpreted what a flying Salamence would actually look like. Here is Salamence in Pokemon Me. It's very similar to the one found in Pokemon Battle Revolution. This idle animation is so much better than Salamence's actual idle animation that it hurts. There's also some really sad irony here. Try and follow the logic with me on this one. So Game Freak puts Salamence on the ground and has it flapping its wings, but when they want to portray Salamence flying in the air, they make sure that its wings aren't moving. Classic Game Freak logic.
Electros!
The Electros, due to having the levitate ability, is actually eligible for Sky Battles. The Electros wasn't in Pokemon Battle Revolution because Revolution only goes up to Generation 4. But then I remembered that I have Pokédex 3D Pro. It's a neat little game that has high quality models and animations of all of the Pokemon up to Generation 5. The Pokemon introduction clips I've been showing you are from Pokédex 3D Pro. Electros was always one of my favorite Pokemon, and I really loved this idle animation. Game Freak took a different approach with regards to Electros though. This is a really weird one because unlike every other Game Freak animation that was featured in this video, this one is actually properly animated. It shows Electros using its levitate ability to levitate, but instead of having Electros just stand there, Game Freak actually animated it to swim. A lot of people preferred Electros' animation found in Pokemon Black and White from DS. So Pokédex 3D Pro's idle animation would be the preferable animation in this case. Game Freak's idle animation of Electros isn't bad by any means, but it completely alters your perception of the Pokemon. It's also worth noting that Electros is grounded in the anime. The Electros is also grounded in his official artwork. I personally feel that the Game Freak animation was perfect for Sky Battles, but the grounded animation would be more appropriate for regular battles. I'm really curious to see what you guys think, so make sure to leave a comment with which Electros idle animation you prefer. That about wraps up my thoughts on the Sky Battle tragedy. Game Freak is fully capable of animating their Pokemon, and in a lot of cases, they already did animate the Pokemon. It's almost like Game Freak is tone deaf when it comes to the personality of their own Pokemon. They fail to capture the true essence of the Pokemon and communicate that essence to the viewer. However, they definitely do a great job of stripping personality from the Pokemon, which is unfortunate because the Pokemon are a lot more interesting and fun when they're able to express themselves. Always remember, don't settle for less, fight for more. Thanks for watching, guys. Pokemon aren't properly scaled when in battle in Pokemon Sword and Shield. They appear to be properly scaled in the overworld, which is awesome and exciting, but for some odd reason, Game Freak has failed to accurately portray the Pokemon's proper scale in battle, which is very disappointing because that's one of the major hallmarks of a console Pokemon title. The protagonist in Sun and Moon is 4'11", so we will assume the protagonist in Sword and Shield is around that height as well. Let's say he's 5 foot for simplicity's sake. Duraludon, who is seen standing right next to the protagonist, is 5'11", but appears to be shorter, if not the same height as the human child. The saddest part in this scenario is Tyranitar, who is normally portrayed as being a massive beast, towering at 6'7". Yet in Sword and Shield, Tyranitar appears to be smaller than a human child, which is just... why? Why, Game Freak? Here is what a properly scaled Tyranitar looks like for reference. Meganium is used as a representation of Duraludon due to both being the exact same height. Tyranitar is properly portrayed as towering over the human child instead of being humiliatingly emasculated as seen in Sword and Shield. Game Freak never had to worry about Pokemon scale in the past due to primarily working with sprites, but ever since their transition to 3D, they have never gotten Pokemon scale correct. Here is what Game Freak's Wailord looks like in the 3DS release. The protagonist here is 4'11". Wailord is 47 feet and 7 inches. Also known as the largest Pokemon in existence at the moment without the help of a form. That awesome trait of Wailord is completely stripped away by Game Freak. Here is what Wailord is supposed to look like. God, that is so cool. For those of you who don't know, the Wailmer line is already confirmed to be in the Galar Regional Pokedex, so I'm really curious to see how Game Freak handles both regular Wailord as well as Dynamax Wailord. Now I want to let you guys know that I'm fully aware of the restrictions and limitations Game Freak had to work with due to the 3DS's small screen and weaker hardware capabilities to properly convey large Pokemon like Wailord or Tyranitar, making it very challenging to do so, if not impossible. So what is the excuse for Sword and Shield then to not have properly scaled Pokemon when in battle? Now I know what some of you will be thinking, but this Three Kingdoms, the undocked Nintendo Switch and Nintendo Switch Lite screens are kinda small too. That's why Game Freak can't properly scale the model in battle. And that's when I respond with, that doesn't matter. Why doesn't it matter, you ask? Because Dynamax is a thing. Have you guys seen the size of the Dynamax models? They're absolutely massive. They are honestly of similar size, if not larger, than the Wailord found in Pokemon Battle Revolution. In fact, the Gigantamax Pokemon are actually larger than Wailord by a significant amount. Gigantamax Dreadnought is 78 feet 9 inches, and Gigantamax Alcremie is a whopping 98 feet 5 inches. So clearly Game Freak isn't being limited by the screens on the Switch. The hardware is also apparently capable of giving all Pokemon Wailord-sized proportions. So that is also not limiting Game Freak from properly scaling the Pokemon models in battle. Game Freak is capable of blowing up a Pokemon model to be 100 times larger than necessary, but seem incapable to properly scale the regular model. That really puts into perspective where Game Freak's priorities lie, and where they do not. A gimmick is taking priority over the Pokemon themselves, which is truly important. So, how do you guys feel about Tyranitar? What do you think is the reason that Game Freak can make Pikachu as big as a house, but can't have Tyranitar be taller than a child? Make sure to leave your thoughts and reasons down below in the comment section. Thanks for watching, you guys. Max raid battles in Pokemon Sword and Shield are underwhelming because Game Freak homogenized all of the Pokemon move animations to be the exact same. They replaced all of the unique attack animations with a simple splash effect. This happens only when a non-Dynamax Pokemon attacks a Dynamax Pokemon. I'll show you a quick example. Alright, so pay close attention to Corviknight's Steel Wing move animation. Corviknight lunges forward followed by a burst of metallic feathers. Now let's look at the exact same attack, except this time Corviknight will be using it on a Dynamax Pokemon. As you can see, the animation has been changed. Not only does Corviknight not lunge forward, but the burst of metallic feathers has been replaced with a generic splash effect. When your Metagross goes to use Meteor Mash, it will look exactly like this. Flash Cannon will go from this to this. This is because all attacks of the same type use the exact same animation, regardless of base power, and regardless of physical special skill. I have an example to prove this as well. So the first attack that Lucario uses is Power Up Punch. It's a physical fighting type attack with 40 base power. Next, Lucario uses the infamous Focus Blast, a special fighting type attack with a base power of 120. As you can clearly see, both animations are the exact same, regardless of the base power and regardless of whether it's a physical or special attack. All fighting type moves will look exactly like this, including close combat. I have examples of other types as well that shows the exact same splash effect replacing the regular animation. We've seen an example of Flame Charge used in-game by Scorebunny, and here's what it looks like when Arcanine uses it on Dynamax Steel. The animation is then replaced with the Fire Splash. All fire type moves will look exactly like this, such as Fire Blast and Flare Blast. Here is what Scald normally looks like, and here is Scald used on a Dynamax. All water type moves will look exactly like this, such as Hydro Pump or Aqua Pump. Here is an example of Dazzling Gleam, and here is what Dazzling Gleam looks like on a Dynamax Pokemon. All fairy moves will utilize this exact same splash effect animation, such as Moonblast or Play Rough. This is what Solar Beam typically looks like. And here is Solar Beam in Max Raid Battles. The beam was completely removed and replaced with a generic green splash effect. All grass type attacks will look exactly like this, such as Leaf Storm and Leaf Blade. This monotony of all of the attacks in the game for raid battles will make them feel stale and boring very quickly due to the lack of variety. They will also be less satisfying for the non-Dynamax Pokemon because all of their attacks will lack both visual flair and impact that is to be expected of stronger Pokemon attacks. You won't get the same gratification when using your Pokemon's strongest attack because the animation was replaced with an unsatisfying splash effect. Oddly enough, status moves or non-damaging moves seem to retain their original animation. I have no clue why Game Freak has decided to remove hundreds of unique move animations in favor of 18 different colored splash effects. Always remember, don't settle for less, fight for more. Thanks for watching, guys.
こちらもその遊べるようになってます。
Game Freak is lazy and/or incompetent when it comes to animating Pokemon battles. They are blatantly reusing animations from a 6-year-old handheld game and are shamelessly putting them into the Switch game, which is the most powerful Nintendo console. Allow me to prove it. I had to dust off my 6-year-old Pokemon Y collection to get this picture together. And voila! As you can see, the animation found in Pokemon Y from 2013 on the Nintendo 3DS is identical to the animation found in Pokemon Sword and Shield on the Nintendo Switch in 2019. The most pathetic thing is that this is not the first time Game Freak has used handheld tier animations on a home console. Actually, the second time. First time was in Pokemon Let's Go, where you see the exact same laziness. A Pokemon game from 21 years ago has better animation than 2 Pokemon titles on the most powerful Nintendo consoles to ever exist.
What's this? That was weak.
Your favorite Pokemon has a chance of being deleted in the upcoming Pokemon game. Why is your favorite bro being deleted, you say?
With the transition to the Nintendo Switch hardware, with it being much more powerful, allowing us to be much more expressive with each of the individual Pokemon.
That's right, expression. Because I can totally feel the impact of Scorebunny's kick as it bounces in the air. Let me show you what actual expression looks like.
The stage is set and the curtain is out. Bam!
Here are some more examples of expression versus non-expression. The saddest part about this savage neglect of our beloved game is that there are people defending it. I'm going to go through a couple anti-lazy tweets, which is a group of really smart people defending handheld tier animations on a home console. Yeah, how dare they not animate a move that's going to get deleted on every Pokemon when they get a better move. So, right off the bat, you can see that his logic is a little bit flawed. Basically, what he is saying is that Game Freak shouldn't animate a move because it will be used less than other moves. Yeah. They're going to be improving the animations. That double click animation is most likely going to change. I'm saying we shouldn't judge the game until we see it 100% finished. Again, with the delusion, Game Freak is not going to be changing the animation because they haven't in the past 6 years. They didn't for Let's Go, and they're not going to for Sword and Shield. People out here forgetting that there's literally an option to turn off move animations, which makes all moves look exactly like this. So, Game Freak's animations are so bad that there are people out there that actually believe that the animations aren't even on. I mean, there's not much more to say. It's probably just because it's a demo version? Well, unfortunately not. I mean, I know the game does look like a demo, and it's going to look like that come November when you pay full price for it. Game Freak is complacent with their laziness and /or incompetence because it doesn't matter if the game is poorly optimized.
Its power. So yeah, that.
You talked about how when the weather changes at specific Pokemon, what
環境のバトルっていう風になってまして、今回の環境のバトルで、実際に戦ったり。
It doesn't matter if the game is graphically underwhelming. It doesn't matter if the game is absent of soul or essence at any time.
Water type Pokemon, and maybe if it was snowing, you'd see more ice type Pokemon, for example. 毎日こうワイドエリアは天候があって。
None of that stuff matters. Pokemon Sword and Shield would be one of the best-selling games on the Nintendo Switch console. And that is the cold, hard truth. I love Pokemon. Pokemon Yellow was the very first video game I ever played. We live in a world where Nintendo finally has a console that supports something like this. Unfortunately, with Game Freak at the helm, we will never get a Pokemon game that comes close to the original aspirations of Pokemon Battle Revolution for the Nintendo Wii, which came out over a decade ago. Don't settle for less, fight for more. Thanks for watching. This is the rating system that I will be using for this review. There are timestamps down below if you wish to hear me discuss particular aspects of the game. There will also obviously be spoilers. You have been warned. Pokemon Sword and Shield are arguably the most controversial and contentious Pokemon titles ever released. Before I get into the review, I would like to touch on some context surrounding the titles regarding this controversy. I feel this is necessary because it is pertinent information that puts the games into proper perspective. Pokemon was always a beloved handheld classic, but titles such as Colosseum, Gale of Darkness, and Pokemon Battle Revolution showcase what the classic handheld titles were capable of on much more powerful hardware, having the ability to bring the Pocket Monster to life like nothing seen before. That fabled title is to finally arrive under the moniker Sword and Shield, and were technically Game Freak's second attempt at a console Pokemon experience, but we like to pretend that other one doesn't exist. The question that was on everybody's mind was, would they deliver? Not much information was known up until the monumental E3 2018 Treehouse demo, which gave everyone an in-depth look at the upcoming games. What was showcased, however, was a far cry from popular childhood dream Pokemon title inspired by the aforementioned console Pokemon game. Despite making a giant leap forward in terms of hardware capabilities, Sword and Shield, at first glance, betrayed that sentiment. It was extremely lackluster, with terrible, muddy textures, stiff and sometimes non-existent animations, bugs, and so on. It was a very disheartening presentation. That was only the beginning. Immediately after the presentation, it was revealed that the National Decks would not make a return. These would be the first games in the series to not have all Pokemon programmed and obtainable in the games. This sparked massive outrage that resulted in a movement called Bring Back National Decks, or BBND for short. This had Pokemon fans protesting in the hope that the decision to exclude some Pokemon could be reversed, giving rise to a counter-movement born out of spite called Don't Bring Back National Decks, or DBBND. The producers of the game reassured that this would grant them additional resources to fully flesh out the remaining Pokemon, and even allow them to focus on game balance, which has been a recurrent issue in the series. However, these words fell on deaf ears, as they did not reflect what was seen in-game. There were minimal, if any, improvements, especially considering the generational shift from a handheld console to a dedicated home console, Switch, which has access to significantly more technological resources than any past Nintendo console. This is further exacerbated by the fact that Pokemon is the highest grossing media franchise on the planet. Time went by and eventually the games were leaked, and to everyone's surprise, it turned out that only 400 Pokemon made it into the final game, which is just under half of all the species. This was never officially announced. It was also revealed that the Pokemon assets, like the models and animations, were reused from the 3DS games. This means that a significant bulk of the work, being the Pokemon themselves, was far less demanding than what was required from past titles. This also means that Game Freak could pump these spare resources into other areas of the game. Did Game Freak take full advantage of this opportunity? Let's take a look. The game starts off a lot more cinematic than past titles, thanks to the hardware jump. It starts off in a huge stadium with a roaring crowd. Not all is well, however. One of the glaring weaknesses of the game rears its ugly head early. There's no voice acting. This heavily detracts from the cinematic nature of the game. It's extremely distracting and shatters immersion as characters' lips move with no sound coming out of them. The beginning is especially jarring as Rose's movements pause between each sentence as he waits for you to make an input. Legend of Zelda series recently introduced voice acting, which paid dividends for what little story that game had to offer. Even the mobile spin-off Pokemon title, Pokemon Masters, takes advantage of what voice acting has to offer. It fleshes out a character in a way that is not possible otherwise. Characters are very important when it comes to media, especially in the RPG genre, which is what Pokemon Sword and Shield are. Many of the cutscenes feel flat and lifeless as a result of the omission of voice acting. Leon also commands his Charizard to Dynamax, but then proceeds to Gigantamax, which sheds a light on the convolution of the mechanic as a whole, but we'll get to that in a bit. After the opening cinematic, the game plays out like it has in the past 2 decades. You are a kid in a small town, you have a mom, dad is absent, you have a rival, a professor, and you are given your very first Pokemon between a selection of fire, grass, or water. It's rather disappointing to see that Game Freak is still unwilling to shake up this formula in any significant way. The pace is also still extremely slow, especially for veteran players. Game Freak at least attempted to address this by allowing some tutorial skips like the catch tutorial, which I admit is a much needed and appreciated addition. However, Game Freak fails to properly implement very basic quality of life features. One of the main criticisms of the last generation, Pokemon Sun and Moon, is that there's way too many cutscenes. On top of that, there's no way to skip any of them, which means you were forced to sit through every single one, every single time.
Nebby, get in the fucking bag!
Game Freak attempted to correct this by adding a skip cutscene option. This, unfortunately, has many flaws. First, as long as the option is on, it will auto-skip every single cinematic cutscene in the game, such as the one seen in the intro. Usually developers give you the option to skip cutscenes you want to skip. Game Freak makes the decision for you every time. Another issue is that you still can't skip the text-based cutscenes. The cinematic cutscenes can be skipped, but there's only a select handful of those in the entire game. The significantly more common cutscenes that want to be skipped cannot be. The same issue that plagued Sun and Moon Return to Sword and Shield. Speaking of cutscenes, the beginning of the game is completely filled with them. You are stopped by Hop around almost every single corner. This slows the pace of the game to a crawl and is a serious drag. Hop, your rival, introduces you to his big brother, Leon. He is Galar's very own unbeatable champion. Leon, as opposed to the region professor, is the one who gives you your first Pokemon, a first for the series. Hop picks the starter that is weak to yours, which makes him significantly less of a challenge, greatly contributing to the lack of difficulty present in the game. You meet Sonya, who is the regional professor's self-appointed assistant, and you eventually meet the professor herself. Magnolia introduces you to the main gimmick of the generation, Dynamax. An object conveniently falls from the sky at the perfect time and miraculously grants the ability to Dynamax. They're called wishing stars and can be used to Dynamax your Pokemon when retrofitted to a Dynamax band. A huge amount of power is just handed to you without the need to accomplish anything. It would have been more satisfying to earn the ability to Dynamax as opposed to receiving it as a handout. Leon then endorses you so that you can partake in the gym challenge. After you make it through the maze of cutscenes, you arrive to the wild area. In here you find dens where you can battle Dynamax Pokemon with 3 other trainers. You also find a wide assortment of Pokemon, some of which are extremely strong. You're physically incapable of capturing these Pokemon, however, as the game prevents it unless you have a certain number of badges. This removes almost all incentive to interact with the stronger Pokemon, since you can't capture them anyways. Instead of locking Pokemon behind badges, they should have allowed you to catch them whenever, but make them fail to obey you unless you have the correct number of badges, similar to what happens when you get a strong traded Pokemon. This way you would have further incentive to interact with a larger array of species and would make the risk of running into the stronger monsters worth it, with the possibility of adding them to your team if you successfully catch them. Once you have your fun in the wild area, you have to head over to Motostoke in order to sign up as a contender for the gym challenge with the champion's endorsement. Once you pick a number and you get fully registered, your adventure truly starts. And unfortunately, it's not much of an adventure. The gym challenge is really your only priority throughout the entire game. Game Freak did a fantastic job with the gyms this time around, probably the best they've ever been, but that's all the game has to offer in terms of a plot. The actual plot is taken care of by Leon. You hear a large explosion in the distance and you want to investigate? Too bad. Leon, Galar's unbeatable champion, will take care of it for you. He does this several times throughout the game. Leon has a more interesting campaign run than Yuzu. It made me wish I was playing as Leon instead of the player character. Leon is the true main character of Sword and Shield. I enjoy having the champion more involved with the story, but Leon is perhaps too involved, effectively sucking the majority of the fun out of the game. Most pieces of plot development arise through interactions with Sonya, although they leave a lot to be desired. You delve into a bit of lore, and you even learn that the true history of the region was hidden and altered. This is pretty interesting, and brings to light many questions like, why was the truth kept secret, and by who? You unfortunately never get any answers as the plot point is dropped almost as fast as it comes up. While Leon is busy playing the game for you, you instead proceed with your gym challenge until you get all 8 badges to be qualified for the Pokemon League. Instead of the Elite Four, this time around you participate in a tournament-style challenge, making your way through until you reach the championship match where you face off against Leon. Before that, you have to participate in an odd fetch quest to meet up with Leon, who went to Rose Tower for some mysterious reason. Once you reach Leon, he is having an important conversation with Chairman Rose. This is supposed to be a pivotal moment of the entire game, yet you are treated to still images with nothing but text. There's not even any music. It's the most bizarre thing I've ever seen. This was a great opportunity to learn more about Leon and Rose's characters, as well as fleshing out the story in an interesting and exciting way as we watch the climax of the plot unfold. Instead, you're left confused, especially with regards to Rose's motivation. To sum it up, apparently all energy in Galar will be exhausted in 1,000 years. There's literally no explanation for why this will be or what will cause this, or even if it's true or not. This makes it hard to understand what Rose is doing and why he feels so rushed to avert the tragedy, despite having hundreds of years to prepare for the worst. Leon refers to Rose's plan as madness, and rightfully so, wanting nothing to do with it. Leon is much more interested in the championship match with the player the following day. But Leon, being a stand-up guy, insists he will help Rose with his plans, but only after the anticipated match. This apparently wasn't a satisfying enough compromise for Rose because he proceeds with his plans regardless of Leon's wishes the following day, right before the championship match. Rose's plan is to bring back the Darkest Day, which was a prophecy you learned about earlier with Sonya. The Darkest Day was a storm that covered Galar about 3,000 years ago. It causes a leakage of Dynamax energy that forces Pokemon to Dynamax, but also has the unfortunate side effect of having the giant Pokemon go berserk. How is this supposed to alter the Galarian energy crisis that's alleged to occur within 1,000 years? Who knows? There were instances of wild Dynamax Pokemon going berserk earlier in the game. It's one of the many side quests that Leon did instead of you, once again having a more enjoyable adventure than the actual player. These events were apparently caused by Rose. Rose then says that his hand was forced by Leon to bring about the Darkest Day because Leon refused to listen, except that Leon was actually willing to hear him out after the championship match was finished. All Rose had to do was wait a couple of hours and he would have had Leon's undivided attention. Rose also stated the energy for the Darkest Day was too much to contain, and he was in a pickle because of it. So not only is Rose extremely impatient, he's also incompetent. Dynamax energy begins to leak out around Galar. While Leon continues to play the game by handling the situation, you, the player, actually get to partake in the plot this time around. You start off by investigating the slumbering wheels in search of the hero Pokemon that stopped the darkest day all those thousands of years ago. You obtain a relic of the Pokemon, but the Pokemon themselves are nowhere in sight. You head back to Hammerlock where Oleana, Rose's trusted secretary, begs for your help to stop Mr. Rose. She fears the underground power plant where Rose is located will collapse. She also informs you that Rose has awakened a Pokemon called Eternatus that emits energy that makes Dynamaxing possible. What is Eternatus exactly? Where did it come from? And how did Rose get his hand on it? Many pressing questions. You head down to meet up with Rose where he claims that he needs to provide Galar with limitless energy to ensure everlasting prosperity, and for some reason, the darkest day was the only means to accomplish this task. Rose has apparently been giving wishing stars to Eternatus. These are the objects that landed in your lap earlier on. Indeed, one of Rose's assistants was tasked with collecting them to this very reason. It appears that Eternatus was encased in some kind of egg-like structure. Rose confesses the odd things happening around the region were a result of him trying to awaken Eternatus. So it seems he found Eternatus debilitated, and that's it. There's no explanation of where he found Eternatus, why it was asleep, why it was in the egg, how he knew where to find it, why it woke up suddenly, why he was unable to contain it. All of this vital information is just pushed to the side as you engage in an extremely easy battle versus Champion Rose. I literally one-shot every single one of his Pokemon. It was really good. After you beat him, he claims he actually wanted to see the championship match and apologized for ruining everything. If that was truly the case, then he could have just postponed his nonsensical plan for a few minutes. Leon rushed to assist Rose by attempting to catch Eternatus. Again, it would have made more logical sense for Rose to simply wait for the match that he himself stated he wanted to bear witness in order to possibly obtain Leon's support without everything blowing up in his face. You move up to the roof where Leon is facing off against the mysterious Eternatus Pokemon, and to my surprise, fails to capture it. Leon so far has been established as, well, undefeatable and perfect in basically every way. He ran through any challenges that he came across up until this point. It probably doesn't help that he used a Pokeball of all things. A noob move for sure. The crappy Pokeball bursts open, because of course it does, and this somehow renders Leon unable to continue. The concussive force, I guess, took him out. Finally, now that the unbeatable champion is out of the way, it's the player's time to shine. After you clap Eternatus, he goes berserk and proceeds to Eternamax. That's right. There's a third form of the same thing, but we'll get to it. In the fight, you are prevented from using any Pokemon attack due to a mysterious power, while Eternatus stands idle storing energy. Then Hob remembers that the two of you have the ancient hero relics, and proposes you use them in the hopes that it will magically do something. Turns out Hop was right, as the two items somehow awaken the legendary dogs from their slumber in the slumbering Weedle, despite having no effect moments earlier. The dogs are also able to fly or teleport, and proceed to join both the player character and Hop right before Eternatus has the chance to decimate them. The two relics are randomly restored and brings the dogs to their true form. It's a pretty sweet transition from the cinematic to the battle, which I really appreciate. A raid-style fight commences with help from the legendary dogs, which renders the otherwise challenging battle mundane and spammy. Simply click the A button until his health is depleted, then throw any Pokeball as it will work like a Master Ball without fail, and that's it. Crisis averted and the world is saved. The dogs jump away and it cuts to black. Extremely underwhelming conclusion to an already underwhelming campaign. Nothing really happens from the first time you register for the gym challenge to the championship match against Leon. You come across some ruins here and there, and you have a few discussions with Sonya, and that's about it regarding the plot. The whole game is pretty much just the gym challenge with the world-threatening event tacked on at the end. As I said earlier, the gym challenge this time around is really amazing, the best it's ever been. But the gym challenge is always only supposed to be the B-plot, while the larger story unfolds in front of you. There really was no unfolding this time around, since Leon handles any obstacle and insists you stick to your measly gym challenge while he saves the world. The gym portion of the game doesn't have to be relegated to the B-plot, that's just how Game Freak treats it. Sword and Shield are no exception. After you save the world, the championship match is rescheduled to 3 days later. I will admit that this was the most highly anticipated championship fight I've ever experienced in a Pokemon game, and I was actually quite nervous going in. This nervousness was mostly attributed to my self-made restrictions I placed upon myself in order to have a more enjoyable experience, but it was hype nonetheless. I barely came out on top, and finally defeated the undefeatable, and then the game ends. I believe this campaign would have been significantly stronger if they just focused on the gym challenge aspect more by fleshing it out. I remember reading leaked plots before the game dropped, one of which stated that Leon was boosted up by sponsors, but was a cheater. He was winning matches that were rigged, and Rose had a part to play in them as well. This brief synopsis of a fake leak is infinitely more interesting than the tacked together plot that Game Freak went with. The player character is just a side character in the Galar play, second fiddle to Leon until he is conveniently incapacitated so that the player can take the wheel for once. They should have found excuses to write Leon out of the story to give the player the opportunity to play the game, but instead he sticks around having a champion time while you're relegated to the B-plot. Don't get me wrong, I like Leon as a champion, and the fight with him is very satisfying. Perhaps if they made Leon the player character instead, the game would have been more interesting. The post-game is pretty abysmal. You basically go on a bunch of sequential identical quests where you need to take down dynamite Pokemon in certain gyms. There are two new antagonists, arguably the worst designed characters in the game, who proclaim to be the new kings of Galar. They run around wreaking havoc by mysteriously forcing Pokemon to dynamite. Their plan is to bring Galar under control of the royal lineage once again. They will achieve this by exposing the true nature of the legendary dogs, by forcing Pokemon to dynamite. Actually no, the plan was to bombard the dogs with Galar particles. But what are Galar particles? What do they do exactly? How do they work? Where did they get them from? How is it administered? No clue. It's alluded that Galar particles are how the brothers were able to force Pokemon to dynamax. In a throwaway line by Piers, he claims those random Pokemon were little experiments. Maybe they were testing the functionality of their Galar particle emitting weapon? Not only is no such weapon mentioned or brought up ever, how would Piers possibly know that was the case? To me it seems like their little experiments were nothing more than redundant fluff to artificially pad out the epilogue play duration. The whole fetch quest by going stadium to stadium is completely unrelated to the brothers' true goal of framing the legendary dogs of atrocities by making them go berserk. The twins confess that it was their ancestors who revised history, like hiding the dog text behind the mural, in an attempt to take credit by obscuring the truth. This caused the royals of Galar to be lauded and revered as heroes, even though they were manipulative liars who, even to present day, are attempting to obtain that same faux reverence that they recently lost due to the uncovering of recent events. They managed to successfully bombard Zamazenta with Galar particles, causing it to go berserk. The player character is tasked with calming it down, which it then tries to jump Hop. Zacian comes to the rescue and stops Zamazenta, who proceeds to run away. The player is then given the opportunity to battle and catch the Baka. After that, you head back to the woods to catch up with Hop for the final battle. For the very first time, your rival actually catches a box legend and then fights you with it, which I thought was pretty sweet. This is followed by some pretty wholesome dialogue with a decently satisfying conclusion to Hop's character. That's the entirety of the story for Sword and Shield. I'm giving the story portion of the game an okay rating. Mostly in part because the gym challenge effort was actually really well done, while just about everything else was subpar at best. The main story lacks cohesion and the narrative surrounding it is extremely muddled. The climax feels contrived and forced. Rose's character is butchered to meet the needs of the plot. The player character's exclusion from many of the story's key events also greatly holds it back. The story and the epilogue is equally as confusing, with the sudden inclusion of Galar particles alongside confusing motivation from the main antagonist. This would have been a great opportunity to dive deeper into the history of Galar, but instead, the player character is subjected to random raid battles that accomplish nothing narrative or plot-wise. The antagonistic twins are also uninspired, extremely one-dimensional, uninteresting, and overall unlikable. With the plot out of the way, let's get into the characters. I will start off with Leon since I've talked about him a fair amount already. As I've mentioned before, he's the center of attention in the game, stealing his spotlight at every opportunity. I like Leon as a character. He's confident and sure of himself. He wants to do the right thing. He reaches out and helps others, including the player character and his little brother. He's also highly competent and entirely dependable. I wish there was more intimate interaction between Leon and Hop, as Hop has a rough time for a bit, which we will get into. Leon could have been the light in the darkness for Hop, but we didn't get a chance to see anything like that. Leon is just too overpowered for his own good. He's literally referred to as the unbeatable champion, which suggests that he can't lose. There's nothing the player could have done that Leon couldn't have done better. Some could argue the only reason the player was able to catch and tCAS was because Leon wore him down for us, and the only reason the player succeeded is because of the legendary dog. Before then, Leon steamrolled through any presented challenge, leaving the player with nothing to do but to continue the gym challenge. He's a pretty impressive champion through and through, and I thoroughly enjoyed the battle with him. He never backs down from a challenge, no matter how hard, and even acknowledges that the player character added the strongest Pokemon to their party, which invokes excitement in him. He has a true champion's mentality. Hop is your rival. He's also extremely annoying, especially in the beginning. He makes up a majority of the text-based cutscenes and they cannot be skipped, which means he drags on, repeating the same thing, how he will be the best or other useless information. Hop is also one of the weakest rivals, simply because he chooses a starter weak to yours, so your first few initial encounters are trivialized. Hop does actually succeed in having a bit of an arc. Around near the halfway point, Hop starts to doubt himself and his capabilities when it comes to Pokemon training. He is challenged by Bede and proceeds to lose. Hop takes this loss extremely personally. Bede implants a seed of doubt that has Hop question his desires to become the best Pokemon trainer of all time. Hop is Leon's brother, which means he's the brother of the unbeatable champion. This places additional pressures onto Hop as he now has to meet high expectations placed onto him by his brother. He feels he needs to uphold the family name and/or the honor in a sense. This is where I feel Leon needed to step in more to give his troubled little brother some much needed direction, to empower Hop and to reassure him that he doesn't need to satisfy any outstanding external expectations. He just needs to follow his own path. This would have been a great character-defining moment for both Leon and Hop, and would have made Hop's arc a lot more satisfying in the end. After Hop loses to Bede, he goes on a pretty nasty losing streak. He continues to lose to the player character, which honestly made me feel pretty bad after every time I crushed him, as opposed to satisfied. He loses to gym leaders, he lost to Rose, he even lost to one of the weirdos in the epilogue. This forces him to take a step back to reevaluate his priorities and motivation, and he eventually comes to the conclusion that he's not fit to be a Pokemon trainer. Hop had an odd obsession with imitating his brother as much as possible in the hopes of being successful. When you fight Hop in the Pokemon League, he even has the exact same intro as Leon, which I thought was a pretty cool touch. But it's not enough to just copy someone else's style or strategy. You need to develop your own unique identity that complements you as a person. That's the lesson that Hop is trying to master throughout his own journey. Hop is able to jump out from his brother's massive shadow looming over him, and is able to carve out his own path, even if it's a different path from that of his brother and the player character. Sonya is the catalyst used whenever the plot needs to be driven forward. She offers almost all of the exposition in the game that has to do with the overarching main plot, and that's about it. You learn that she went on her own Pokemon adventure back in the day, and was even a rival to Leon, but dropped out while Leon went on to be the greatest trainer in the region. Not all is sunshine and rainbows for Sonya. She's dealing with some very personal issues. She recognizes Leon's grand accomplishments and often compares them to herself, and feels dejected and worthless as a result, since she hasn't achieved any significant accomplishments of her own. This has her come across as passive-aggressive and snide towards Leon, perhaps due to an underlying jealousy. An old man in a house right outside the lab in Wedgehurst hints that Leon and Sonya used to have a healthy rivalry, but fails to get into usage. This does imply that the rivalry may have gone sour, which may be one of the reasons Sonya ended her gym challenge prematurely. Perhaps Leon was a love interest that fell for another girl, or maybe Sonya just couldn't keep up. The old man's wife does mention that Leon never held back, even in practice matches. Maybe Leon was just too overwhelming for Sonya. We're sadly left with only speculation, as their relationship, both past and present, isn't explored in any meaningful way throughout the game, which is disappointing, seeing as how there's a lot of potential interesting history between the two. Sonya's whole deal is that she wants to prove to everyone, including herself, that she's capable of great things, is competent, and has talent. She wants to unearth Galar's mysterious past in order to claim the finding of a lifetime to put her name on a pedestal. She yearns to elevate her social status, and fears she will grow old and wither without proving her worth. Sonya is actually a pretty dark and complex character underneath her bubbly exterior, even with the little bit that is revealed to us, which makes her waste of potential all the more frustrating. Magnolia steps down and Sonya supplants her, taking on the important role of regional professor. Sonya is the first character to assume this role during a campaign. This is a huge moment for Sonya, and is further complemented by a book that documents her many findings regarding the legend of Galar. She thanks the player character and Hop for helping her find her way, giving her insight into what she cherished and why. The 8 gym leaders are some of the more memorable ones as of late. This is thanks largely in part to their animations in-game, which are expressive and unique to each individual. That's right, the leaders actually have some high-quality animations. Stuff like Raihan snapping a selfie before he Gigantamaxes his Pokemon is just so awesome. It makes you imagine a scenario where he would post the image on social media after securing a fat W. It makes you appreciate the character even more, despite nothing like that being in the game itself. This is only possible because of the solid animations each trainer brings to the table. The lack of voice acting hurts for sure, and would have fleshed out each of them even more. And their involvement in the story is at an unfortunate bare minimum, with Piers as the exception. Despite these shortcomings, these new gym leaders are a welcome addition to the series, and will personally remember most of them for years to come. Rose is arguably the worst villain introduced to the series, if you can even call him. There have been some stinkers in the past title for sure, with some really stupid ideas and plan execution, but at least you could understand the motivations behind those stupid ideas and terrible plans. Rose wants to save Galar by destroying it. It's not clear how flooding the region in Dynamax energy is somehow supposed to avert an energy crisis within 1,000 years. Not to mention that it has an important side effect of unleashing tons of giant, rampaging wild Pokemon, like something straight out of Attack on Titan. This has the opposite effect of what Rose is trying to accomplish. How did Rose even learn about alternatives? Where did he find it? Why was Rose in such a rush to fix a problem that has a window of 1,000 years? His plan is just so incredibly idiotic and his motivations are contradicted by his actions. I was unable to suspend my disbelief enough to the point where I could believe that Rose had exhausted every alternative course of action and had no choice but to go with the one he went with. It feels more like Rose did what he did so that the stakes could be artificially increased in order for the campaign to have a grand conclusion, instead of having a character act organically of their own accord. Rose is nothing but a plot device, which is unfortunate because he was an interesting character up until the very end. He was established as a very charismatic, competent, and even brilliant man. Not only was he the chairman of the Gym Challenge, but he procured a monopoly on power distribution in Galar with his company, Macro Power. No idiot, yet his actions at the end of the game suggest otherwise. When he wasn't acting as the chairman, he would go out in his hilarious civilian attire, donning a cap and shades with a pair of polka dot short shorts. This is in stark contrast to his more serious business-oriented suit, and makes him come across as more lax and comical in nature. It's never really explained why he dresses this way, but it's funny regardless. He has an odd moment with Bede where he seems to forget who Bede is, despite taking Bede in at a young age and taking care of him. He's Bede's surrogate father. He gave Bede his very first Pokemon and even endorsed him for the Gym Challenge. It's established that Oleana asked Bede to collect Wisdom Stars for Rose in order to give to Eternatus to enact his Darkest Day plan, which is of the utmost priority and importance to Rose. He may not have explicitly given the order to Bede himself, most likely enlisting Oleana's help due to being too busy, but he at the very least knew about it, so it's extremely confusing how or why he would momentarily forget who Bede was. Perhaps Rose has some kind of underlying mental deficiency which might be attributed to an extreme lapse of rational judgment later on in the story, or maybe Rose simply doesn't care much about Bede and is just using him to obtain his ultimate objective. When Bede attempts to destroy the mural, Rose genuinely looks disappointed, which would suggest emotional investment on Rose's part in his relationship with Bede. Rose's fate is ambiguous. It's mentioned in a throwaway line that after the Eternatus event, he turned himself in. A flaccid end to a flaccid tale. Speaking of Bede, he's one of the three rivals in the game. He's rude, arrogant, condescending, and clunky to the point of being narcissistic. Bede is actually one of the better characters in the game, as it's very satisfying to blow him up in battle. It's tragic when he is practically deleted from the story in the second half. He starts off as a giant asshole who has endorsement even more prestigious than the unbeatable chairman himself. He's very full of himself, leading to him overestimating his abilities, which makes fighting against him and winning very satisfying. You learn early on that he's collecting Wisdom Stars, although he doesn't specify why. The next time you see him, you learn that he's more than just the chairman's endorsee. They have a history. And you also learn that a huge motivation for Bede is to assist the chairman in any way that he can. One can deduce that Bede is collecting Wishing Stars for the sake of the chairman. After you collect your 4th badge, you run into Bede again and he's trying to destroy a historical mural in order to, you guessed it, collect Wishing Stars to gain the chairman's favor. It's unclear how destroying the painted wall will somehow grant Bede the Wishing Stars he's looking for, as later on when the wall falls there are no Wishing Stars. It's a pair of statues that slightly drives the overarching plot forward with some exposition from Sonya. It makes no sense why Bede would do this, and he pays an exorbitant price for doing something so reckless that would have yielded 0 Wishing Star net gain in the end anyways. Did Bede know that there was a hollowed out section behind the mural, or were his actions simply a necessary convenience to drive the plot forward? I'm leaning towards the latter. After losing to the player character for the 3rd time in a row, he's confronted by Chairman Rose, who is disappointed in Bede and decides to revoke his endorsement, effectively disqualifying Bede from the Gym Challenge indefinitely. This is a devastating blow to Bede as a character. While his actions were questionable and selfish, completely disregarding the historical significance of the mural he was about to destroy, he was doing it to help the chairman. He is, however, crushed in battle, removed from the gym challenge, and worst of all, he disappoints the one person who has been driving Bede's motivation up to this point in the story. Bede should be beyond traumatized after this event, or so you would think. You run into Bede again shortly after, and he seems perfectly fine. In fact, he's motivated more than ever to continue helping the chairman, even though the chairman crushed his dreams. You have to give respect to Bede's resounding resilience and optimism considering the dire circumstance he finds himself in. He's willing to approach the chairman to ask for a second chance until the gym leader Opal approaches him and he decides to go with her instead of helping the chairman. And then disappears from the game until the very end in the Pokemon League. When you chat with Bede in the Pokemon League, he admits that the chairman completely disowned him for making a single mistake, which no one really seemed to care about in the end anyway. He then goes into a bit of detail about his experiences with Opal. Bede is a different character, and I would argue a worse one. He went from being overly confident, sure of himself, and dismissive, to weak, diffident, and submissive. Literally all of his recent development was off-screen, so it doesn't feel earned, and you aren't as sympathetic and invested in Bede as a result. Before you fight Bede for the last time, he wagered that if he lost, he would retire. But when he loses, the crowd pleads for him to not retire, so he doesn't. Bede is always too easily influenced / manipulated by somebody else, and this doesn't change. First manipulated by Rose / Uliana, then by Opal, and then by complete randoms in the crowd. He never makes important decisions for himself throughout the entire game. He just does what others tell him to do, which is disappointing. He didn't decide to become the next fairy gym leader on his own, he was coaxed by those around him. His cockiness that made him surprisingly likable and charming is washed away in the end, and replaced with nothing that is as endearing or memorable, essentially killing the character. Marnie is the last of the three rivals, and is an extremely underwhelming, underdeveloped, and largely inconsequential for the entirety of the game. She doesn't really do anything, and she doesn't have much of a character to go off of. She's essentially an excuse to include Team Yell, who are equally as disposable and the worst evil team introduced to the series. Leaked rumors posited that Marnie was some kind of runaway princess who wanted to take down the evil and corrupt organization run by Rose. The actual Marnie comes nowhere near as intriguing as that premise. She's just a girl that's there, and remains that way from beginning to end. You don't really learn why she's doing the gym challenge other than to become champion for herself. And the only reason I can think of Team Yell following her around is because she's Piers' sister. Piers is the leader of Team Yell, so Team Yell is basically just a bunch of weirdos obsessed with their boss's sister. Oleana is just as wooden and hollow as Marnie. She's Rose's assistant, is always by his side, and that's it. She seems to have the capability to flip her typical indifferent demeanor into one filled with intense rage. Oleana's animations in her battle have more character than her entire inclusion throughout the story, which speaks volumes to how little she has to offer. Her sole motivations are directly tied to the chairman, similar to how Bede was in the beginning. They should have fleshed her out by diving deeper into Macrocosmos, a large business conglomerate owned by Rose, whom she's the vice president of. They're very similar to Aether Foundation from Sun and Moon, but are way less significant to the overall story, and the player is only introduced to them in the end of the game when you fight off a bunch of them in order to reach Rose. Even though the Pokemon don't speak, a great amount of character can be derived from the designs, cries, and roles within the game. Speaking of the designs, they're really well done. In fact, my all-time favorite Pokemon ever comes from Gen 8. I also really appreciate all of the non-wild overworld Pokemon. The main allure of a Pokemon game is the Pokemon themselves, so seeing them sprawled out wherever you go is an excellent way to immerse the player into the world of Pokemon. To conclude the characters, some had decent arcs, some were ruined, and others were planks of wood. The designs for the most part are solid, especially the Pokemon. Overall, the characters are okay. The music was one of the few things I was looking forward to before the game dropped, and I would say I wasn't disappointed for the most part. There are some straight bangers like Oleana's battle theme. Marnie's battle theme. And Eternatus's first encounter theme. I could go on, honestly. Some otherwise great tracks I feel were ruined with the inclusion of the doggo vocals. I mean, I get it. Watch legends are doggos, but the dogs such wolf vocals clash and distract more than contribute to making the beat better. The music does a great job of establishing the tone and feel within a given area. The wild area has some tracks that capture that Breath of the Wild aesthetic with a common piano. Bagpipes serve up that Scottish feel, which ties into the inspiration behind the region, the UK. One of the essential contributing factors to the success of the Gym Challenge is thanks mostly in part to the music. It captures that epic scale that made me fall in love with the older Pokemon console titles. The music for the gym leaders is dynamic, meaning it changes throughout the course of the battle. It starts off very energetic, which gets you pumped up and excited for the battle that is about to unfold. When one of your Pokemon faints, the music tones down and the main melody is drowned out by a roaring bass, which does a great job at heightening tension, knowing that you're closer to possibly losing. When you finally reach the gym leader's last remaining Pokemon, the music shifts again, slowly building up in tempo as the crowd erupts into a chant. This is followed up by the gym leader Dynamaxing their Pokemon, significantly increasing their power and threat level. This was amplified in my run due to denying my ability to use Dynamax, which means the gym leader was a genuine threat, forcing me to make the best plays I could in order to come out on top. All of this is why the gym aspect of this game is the best it has ever been. Game Freak succeeded in making the gym challenge feel like a real sport of Goliath, and for that, I commend them. Overall, the music is good, and is one of the best parts of Sword and Shield, hands down. Now let's get into the actual game itself. It plays just like any other Pokemon game and has all of the elements present in past titles, with a few tweaks here and there. You no longer need to hold a button to run, as the character moves how you would expect him to. Tilt a bit to walk, tilt all the way to run. This is a great addition and makes traversing the game more enjoyable without having to break the combat process. This is a far cry from the other Switch Pokemon title, Let's Go, where movement felt very rigid as opposed to the smoothness present in Sword and Shield. A change that was introduced in Let's Go unfortunately found its way into Sword and Shield, and that is permanent experience share. In past titles, experience share was always optional in order to cater to different kinds of playstyles. Typically, if you wanted to make things easier, you would turn it on, and if you wanted a bit more of a challenge, you would turn it off. Pokemon has always lacked a basic difficulty setting, so turning off experience share was seen as marginal. Game Freak has made the decision for the player this time around by forcing experience share to be on at all times for the entire party. This has detrimental consequences to the game. First of which, it makes the games mind-numbingly easy, trivializing every encounter and removing basically any incentive from training any of your other Pokemon, seeing as how the game does this for you. To avoid over-leveling due to the experience share, it forced me to speed through the game while avoiding anything that gave additional experience. This means that I was forced to skip many new features of the game like raid battles and Pokéballs to avoid over-leveling and lobotomizing the game in the process. I also avoided wild battles almost entirely, which is unfortunate because overworld encounters is a nice addition that carried over from Let's Go, that I never really got to play around with. Even foregoing these additional sources of experience, I still found myself over-leveled during certain parts of the game. There is the option to box your entire team and just run around with a single Pokemon, but not only is this time-consuming and tedious, you shouldn't be forced to jump through hoops that were not only not present in past titles, but placed there deliberately by the developers. That's called bad game design. In order to produce any semblance of challenge to circumvent the disastrous experience share system, I had to put in place some self-made restrictions, which were: 1. Remove Pokemon Center healing. The game, unfortunately, fully heals you around almost every corner regardless, but there was some nice resource management required, and taking care of my own Pokemon was surprisingly rewarding. 2. No Dynamax, which is the premier gimmick of this generation that I will get into shortly. 3. No items during battle. And 4. Set battle style. Thankfully, this option was still available as shift style breaks the game. These restrictions actually made the game enjoyable and challenging, especially with regards to the gym leaders and their dynamic Pokemon. Game Freak's recurrent design philosophy is to introduce a new battle gimmick each generation. First it was Mega Evolutions, a welcomed addition that breathed new life into some obscure and forgotten Pokemon. This was followed by Z-moves, which were one-time use, terribly animated, super powerful attacks. The newest gimmick is Dynamax, I was unimpressed when it was first introduced since Pokemon just get bigger, and in my opinion, it's not really changed since then. The only good thing about Dynamax is that it makes the campaign more exhilarating and difficult, but only if you refuse to use the mechanic itself, which is ironic. That's the only thing I like about Dynamax. The mechanic itself is inherently broken, being banned from Smogon singles, banned in doubles, and even restricted in Ubers, a tier dedicated to the most broken things in the game, a testament to how absurdly powerful Dynamax actually is. This is because Dynamax makes the Pokemon extremely bulky by doubling its HP, making it almost impossible to one-shot said Pokemon, even with a 4x super effective attack. The Dynamax Pokemon is given access to Hyper Beam level attacks that cannot miss, that grant very beneficial bonus effects during the 3-turn duration of the power-up. Dynamax also makes some attacks outright fail, and the Pokemon cannot be removed from battle. This limits both strategy and counterplay when facing off against Dynamax. It can also be activated at any time with any Pokemon, which adds a surprise factor to the mechanic and makes it hard to play around. The Pokemon is also free to hold any item in which. Dynamax has the ability to outright decide the result of the battle. Some Mega Evolutions were obscenely powerful as well, but it was limited to a select pool of Mons, and they had to sacrifice the health items. Dynamax has no such restrictions. I also find Dynamax unappealing because the Pokemon just gets bigger. GameCube tried to address this with new Dynamax forms called Gigantamax, which is literally just a giant Mega Evolution, except almost every single Gigantamax form is extremely ugly, with very few exceptions. The only difference between Dynamax and Gigantamax is that Gigantamax grants a new form, it's limited to certain Pokemon, and their main stab gets a slight animation tweak with a different bonus effect, and that's it. There's a third transformation called Returnamax, but so far this is exclusive to Wild Return. The mechanic as a whole is a confusing mess that gets stale pretty quickly, especially with regards to competitive battles. Each battle is decided by Dynamax as opposed to the player's skill. This makes the game feel more like a coin flip than a game of chess. Battles are focused more on Dynamax use than how the game is played. And finally, Dynamax trivializes every encounter in the main campaign if you do choose to use it, further contributing to the lack of challenge found in the game without self-made restrictions. Challenge is only derived from the player, not the developer, despite that being a developer's job, not the player. Battles are still sluggish and slow, and feel virtually identical to their 3DS counterparts despite being superior hardware with additional resources. Sword and Shield really do feel like a 3DS sport a majority of the time. Temtem is a good example to show tiny tweaks that optimize performance and experience in battle. For example, instead of having status effects played one at a time, like in Sword and Shield, Temtem has them resolve at the same time. This may not seem like much, but it makes each encounter feel more responsive, concise, and speeds up interactions greatly. Other turn-based games, like Persona, allow you to fast-forward gameplay during battle, greatly speeding up the tempo of a fight if you so desire. Pokemon hasn't changed up the battle formula at all. It still plays exactly like it always has ever since the Game Boy days, making Sword and Shield feel dated and clunky. Majority of the animations are lacking, some attacks not even animated at all. This is because every single animation for old Pokemon were reused from past titles, despite the removal of half of all species and the promise of enhanced expression. This is not to say that all of the Pokemon animations are terrible. There are some impressive ones like Powerball. The inconsistency in the quality of the animations is dumbfounding. I can't believe that Double Kick, a move not even animated, is in the same game as Pyroball, one of the best looking Pokemon attacks I've ever seen. Guess that's what happens when you shove a bunch of 6-year-old, low-quality animations from the 3DS into your Switch game without revising or updating them to be appropriate for the console. The models are also exactly the same, with only a select few Pokemon receiving minor tweaks. The Pokemon models are not properly scaled, and seem to retain their 3DS proportions despite now being on home console, which supports the 3DS port aspect of the game. This is disappointing as one of the main draws of a console Pokemon title is having the opportunity to see Pokemon size relative to one another. Something that a Game Boy simply couldn't accomplish was demonstrated perfectly on home consoles. Sword and Shield fails to capture this magic. It's odd that GameCube introduced a mechanic where the Pokemon are gigantic, but somehow fails to scale the regular Pokemon properly. This shows a lack of care and attention to detail that was captured in much older games. The only reason I can surmise to explain why the Pokemon retain their 3DS proportions is because Game Freak are obsessed with a particular camera angle. It's an angle that emulates the one used in handheld games, showing the back of your Pokemon in front of the opposing Pokemon. This angle would not be possible if the Pokemon, say Wailord, came out, because they would be too large and it just wouldn't work from the specific perspective that Game Freak insists on retaining, despite not translating to 3D very well. Game Freak was fine with omitting this absurd and unnecessary design restriction when introducing Dynamax. as the camera pans out accordingly to fit the massive Pokemon into the frame. This is not an issue at all in other console titles due to a dynamic camera that pans all around the battlefield. Sword and Shield also have a dynamic camera, but it always defaults to the Game Boy's perspective at the start of every turn. It's a neat homage to the Game Boy days, but it has some major repercussions to the actual game that just aren't worth it. One of the things missing from current Pokemon games that was present in past titles, with regards to the Pokemon themselves, is nuance. Old Pokemon always made a return, but each game they felt new and fresh due to an overhaul in assets. They would get new sprites, some of the sprites being animated depending on the generation. Some features were familiar, but they still felt new all the same. The shift to 3D makes development easier as the same assets can be repurposed for new titles, but at the cost of nuance. A large portion of Sword and Shield isn't new. It's stuff we've seen for the past 6 years, and this takes away a bit of the magic of the user, especially for the first real attempt at a Pokemon console title. The AMD feature from XY, or Refresh with Sun and Moon, returns for the third time in Pokemon Camp, and overall it's a downgrade. You can no longer feed or even pet your Pokemon like you could in the past. Instead, you are given clothes like this stick, which you wave around in your Pokemon's face until they're fed up and attack, and the ball, which your Pokemon fetch and then bring back to you. Petting your Pokemon or feeding them by hand is a lot more personal and meaningful, and you are rewarded with some of the best animations in the series. The toy stripped this intimate experience and replaces it with a sterilized, watered-down version that is less enjoyable. It's also prone to glitches and bugs, occasionally trapping Pokemon in infinite run cycle loops that they can't escape from, which completely shatters what little immersion that remains. You can technically feed your Pokemon with the curry minigame, sort of. The Pokemon pretends to eat invisible curry while the player character eats the real stuff, which comes across as awkward and downright cute. At least you're rewarded with a cute animation like in Pokemon and Me/Red. The curry minigame itself is like the Pokemon minigame from Gen 4. Just like with those games, the appeal of making curry with the minigame wears off pretty quickly. Pokemon Camp was another feature that I skipped entirely thanks to the mandatory experience share, in order to avoid gaining additional experience that would strip difficulty and therefore lower enjoyability of the game. The concept of the Wild Area is the series' first encounter with a controllable camera. It took the franchise over 20 years, but they finally managed to do it, and it's honestly not very impressive. The Wild Area is one of the worst looking locations in the entire game. The textures used here are terrible, like the infamous trees, and despite there now being overworld Pokemon in the game, the Wild Area, at times, feels lifeless and barren due to the short render distance of the Pokemon. Pokemon only render when the player is within a very close range. This means that Pokemon pop in and out of existence as you run around in the wild area, which not only looks bad, but has the game come across as unoptimized and cheap. It's a shame the dev team wasn't able to implement a more clever way to mask the pop-in, or find a way to extend the range. The wild area itself is about as large as Hyrule Field in Ocarina of Time, and about just as empty too. At least Hyrule Field has some secrets for you to uncover, incentivizing the player to explore in order to uncover all of them. The wild area has no such thing. It's nothing more than a very large row with a controllable camera that isn't very pretty to look at. Exploration doesn't yield any gain, except for a few items strewn about. There are new species you can hunt for, but as addressed earlier, if the Pokemon is too high of a level, you cannot even catch them, so it defeats the purpose of interacting with them until you get the necessary badge. There are portals laid out everywhere that give you access to raids that I will discuss later on. The Wild Area is a great concept, offering that open world feel that so many have desired for a Pokemon game, but it definitely needs a lot of work. Hopefully the next game is able to build off of the Wild Area as opposed to placing it into the game what seems like the last minute, as this is the only area with camera manipulation, and the Wild Area's overall presentation feels unfinished. While the Wild Area is a graphical disaster, the rest of the game doesn't look nearly as bad, with some areas actually looking like they belong on the Switch. Places like Val and Lee are oozing with personality and are great to look at. Unfortunately, most towns are extremely tiny, so despite some of the locality looking great, they are mostly forgettable. Some towns are a bit larger, but are mostly empty and lifeless. This is in stark contrast to places like Castelia City and Black and White, who are populated with NPCs that brings a sense of life and energy not present in places like Winden from Sword and Shield. Towns are mostly memorable depending on how useful they are to the player. In past titles, you would always remember the town that the move relearner resided in, or where the move deleter was located in order to rid yourself of those pesky HMs. Thankfully, HMs are not present for the second generation in a row, with the taxi service taking care of flying and the bike taking care of surfing. These are great additions, and traversing the world of Pokemon has never been so streamlined. The move relearner and deleter have also been merged into one location, the Pokemon Center, which means you can travel just about anywhere to access these useful features. There's never any real reason to return to a town once you've visited it for the first time, except for the towns that house customization stores. This is Game Freak's third iteration of trainer customization, and just like before, you can change your hair, eyes, and clothes to your own preference. A minor criticism that ends up being very annoying once your clothing collection gets larger is that you can't see the items in your list, only their names. So if you don't remember the name of your favorite shirt, you need to equip every single piece of clothing until you land on the correct one. Typically when playing with avatar customization in a game, the customization piece is usually displayed visually so you know what it looks like. The weirdest part is that Game Freak solved this problem back in X and Y, Game Freak's very first attempt at trainer customization. In X and Y, whenever you hovered over an item, it would show you exactly what that item looked like. This was very helpful when looking for a specific item without having to equip every single piece every single time. Sun and Moon suffer from the same issues found in Sword and Shield. Despite being the third iteration, the customization system in Sword and Shield is technically worse than it was in X and Y, due to not being as user-friendly. Exploration as a whole is extremely linear. Sword and Shield suffer from corridor syndrome, where a majority of the game is nothing but straight lines. Spike Move, one of the towns in the game, is quite literally just a straight line from beginning to end. There's no real exploration, and therefore no true sense of adventure to be found throughout the campaign. The older titles had large, sprawling caves and locations that required thought and effort to traverse successfully. These locations were separated into floors, each as big as the last. There were also some hidden areas where it wasn't immediately apparent how to reach, or required story progression to gain access. Sword and Shield doesn't really have anything like this. The game only has 2 caves, both of which are just straight lines with very little diverting paths in between. The only verticality the game has to offer are ladders that bring you from one small area to another small area. These ladders also have the unfortunate side effect of freezing the game rolls whenever they're in use. This doesn't break the game or anything, but it certainly detracts from your immersion and investment in the world. The staples was changed into a key item in the game. At first I thought it was a cool idea, but this change actually lessens resource management. Not that it would have made much of a difference in Sword and Shield anyway, because you never have any reason to use the escape rope. This is because the entire game is extremely straightforward, a straight line from beginning to end. This is perfectly illustrated in Sword and Shield's final route. Victory Road, usually the very last route in a Pokemon game, is the final challenge before the Elite Four. Typically, it's a difficult place to navigate as it requires you to bring along every skill you've learned up to that point. It's also flooded with strong wild Pokemon and trainers alike. The Victory Road in Sword and Shield is called Route 10. Aside from having some of the strongest trainers seen up to that point, it's just a straight line. It's an excellent representation of what Sword and Shield plays like for almost the entirety of its relatively short campaign. Fudge, a fellow content creator, sums up the linearity issue in Sword and Shield really well. I highly suggest you check out Fudge's stuff. He makes great videos. A link to the video I'm about to reference from him, as well as a link to his channel, will be in the description.
Unfortunately, we have not lost the linearity. I've said before that linearity in and of itself is not a problem, and I stand by that, but here's the thing. Most games that are linear in the way that Pokemon Sword and Shield is linear are linear because they have complex, deep, and interesting stories that they need to tell you. Games like Okami and The Last of Us that I've talked about before, these games don't want you straying too far off the beaten path because they have a story to tell you, and that story is important. And even then, especially in the case of Okami, they still let you do a little bit of exploration and traversing the world on your own. Sword and Shield's story is not deep, complex, or interesting enough to justify how much it is boxing you into small areas with no opportunity to explore. Almost every single time you make it to a new major town, city, or location in this game, you're there. You're stuck there. You have to do everything you can do there to satisfy the story before you can move on. Your paths out of that location are going to be blocked off in basically every direction apart from back. At no point can you ever journey ahead to the next route or town ahead of time and have your own little adventure. When you first stumble upon Pacific Log Town, it feels amazing because it's so tucked away from everything else and quite hard to get to, hard to find. And finding this whole new, pretty secretive area is really, really cool. This is the kind of thing that Pokemon Sword and Shield is missing, missing, and in my opinion, this is the kind of thing that Pokemon has been missing for a while now. This sense of a cohesive, open world, a sense of genuine exploration, and not constantly being boxed off and forced into small areas. There's no town in Sword and Shield that is non-compulsory. You'll go everywhere and basically do everything the game wants you to do.
There's also a lot of empty space with nothing of substance to offer. I came across a giant hotel that was nothing but one giant empty floor, no hidden items, and barely any NPCs to interact with, none of which offered any useful items or advice. The game doesn't reward the time you invest to explore what little it has to offer. There's also a line of several houses in Wyndham that are a direct one-to-one copy-paste of one another, right down to the placement of garbage in the trash bin. Tiny things like this make the world feel incredibly small, artificial, and inorganic. The post-game, gameplay-wise, is lacking in content. The raid battles during the epilogue aren't any different from raid battles you can experience in the wild area again. After the epilogue, you finally gain access to the battle tower. Sword and Shield have one of the worst iterations of the battle tower. It's so unbelievably limited. They, for some reason, completely removed multi-battles, which was present in the battle tree in the recent titles. This is very disappointing because playing with friends in the battle tower was actually really fun. Multi-battles also allowed you to team up with the many different characters you came across on your journey, something you can no longer do in Sword and Shield. They removed the super formats in favor of a tier system. This is worse because the battle tower is brain dead easy for every single tier and doesn't get substantially more difficult in between the tiers, unlike the difference in past titles from regular to super. They also removed the awesome feature of recognizable and notable trainers from across the Pokemon franchise. The only super boss trainer in the battle tower is Leon, who is rocking different attire. Dynamax completely destroys the battle tower as Leon is one of the only trainers who is actually capable of Dynamaxing. And it's always the same charge art that makes Leon aesthetically predictable. So you can easily run through any trainer you come across by blowing them up with your busted Dynamax Pokemon. There's way less Pokemon to play with as a result of the National Dex ban, as well as less Pokemon to play against. This battle tower is a horrible downgrade compared to the battle tree in every way. The only good thing I can say about the battle tower is that you can purchase mints with battle points, which allows you to change the active ability of your Pokemon. This is one of the few examples of exclusive Sword and Shield innovation that is sorely lacking. Other than the terrible battle tower, you're left with the Dex completion and shiny hunting. The Dex is way easier to complete due to the pool of available Pokemon being much smaller, and shiny hunting is actually worse than it was in Let's Go, and you can't see shiny Pokemon in the overworld, despite that not being a problem in Let's Go. You can also breed and train up competitive teams. A nice change that makes training easier is that supplements are no longer capped at 100 EVs per stat, and can now be used to max stats, which defeats the purpose of EV training against wild Pokemon so long as you have sufficient capital. Breeding functions the exact same, and the bottle cap system that maxes out IVs via hyper training makes a return, but you still need to max out your Pokemon's levels in order to use the bottle cap, which is extremely inconvenient, and you're better off just breeding Pokemon with IVs in mind. The overall gameplay experience is bad. There's very little improvements or innovation throughout, and there are quite a few regressions, which is just unacceptable for the series of over 2 decades of games to improve upon under their belt. The battles play out just as they always have. They are still sluggish and feel like the entire system was just ported over from the 3DS. A Wii game from 2006 has a more engaging and exciting battle system that makes every battle feel grand and important. I will concede that gym battles managed to capture this feeling with its atmospheric setting mixed with the dynamic music and high-stakes gameplay. Most things look better than they did on the 3DS thanks to the massive spike in hardware capability, allowing a native HD resolution of 1920 by 1080. But the game is capped at 30 FPS despite not being that technologically impressive, and even dips in some areas like in the wild area. Sword and Shield don't boast groundbreaking AI, they don't utilize physics, there's very little collision, the mechanics are extremely simple, the gameplay itself is actually quite static, the quality of the textures dips substantially in some areas, and the graphics as a whole are some of the weakest on the console, at least for a AAA title. The game doesn't look or feel like it's pushing the system at all, yet the performance is unimpressive regardless. The game removed all touchscreen capabilities, which makes it feel less intuitive than even Let's Go, which still has touch functionality intact. This is sorely missed, especially when playing with the Switch undocked, or having access to the built-in touchscreen would make the experience more enjoyable and accessible. Another awesome feature left behind from Let's Go is the ability for your Pokemon to follow you, a beloved staple from Heart Gold Soul Silver. Game Freak lets you not only have follow Pokemon, but they even allowed you to ride your own Pokemon, which was so awesome. And this Pokemon interactivity is my favorite part about the terrible Let's Go games. It's disappointing to see Game Freak omit the inclusion of this great feature. Game Freak let you ride your Pokemon in the retro Game Boy era routes, yet when they finally introduced their very first open area, they stripped the ability to ride your Pokemon or have them follow you. It honestly makes no sense why there are no follow Pokemon or rideable Pokemon in Sword and Shield. It's cool to see the bike return, other than the atrocious clown suit they force upon you whenever you ride it. I don't know why Game Freak insists on implementing these ugly ride uniforms. You've never needed to equip a clown suit in the past, and they dropped it in Let's Go, but then brought it back randomly for Sword and Shield. It seems like Game Freak just arbitrarily decide what to bring back and what to exclude, depending on how they feel any given day. Most of the innovative features present in the game are just carried over from other titles, like the mobile PC box or overworld Pokemon, Pokemon interactions, exploration, the battle tower, the online, which we will get to, the post-game, trainer customization, and the amount of overall content is just simply worse in almost every way, regressing in quality from what was previously established in past titles. This is devastatingly disappointing, and hurts even more when considering how highly anticipated this game was and what this game could have been. There's an obscene amount of handholding. Due to the linear nature of the game, there's basically zero incentive to play through a second time, as each sequential save will play out exactly like the last, with little variance between them. This is because the game tells you where to go and when. Everyone will have near identical experiences while playing this game, because you're constantly forced into a box and prevented from exploring. There's nothing new or exciting to uncover for yourself. No thought is required when traversing, and the rails that you are put on from start to finish is generally insulting to the player's intelligence. The wild area grants some leeway, but it doesn't take long to see all of it, and when you do, there's nothing left. Although the HM system is flawed, it was a great tool used to generate secrets and hidden areas. Removing them has opened up the game to the player, but that leaves no room for discovery. It would be really cool if Game Freak implemented a requirement-based system for progression purposes, maybe requiring certain Pokemon or certain attacks to access new locations. Instead of forcing the player to teach Pokemon HM Cut, an extremely underwhelming and less than useful move, require the player to teach their Fire-type Pokemon a Fire-type move, to burn down a tree blocking the path. You see an item on a cliff that you can't reach? Require the player to use a Flying-type Pokemon with a Flying-type move. These are moves that your Pokemon learn naturally and are useful. It rewards the player for expanding their team by catching many different kinds of Pokemon. It rewards them for properly training their Pokemon. It rewards exploration, and the player gets the satisfaction of uncovering a secret that wasn't hand-fed to them by the game. Xenoblade Chronicles 2 does something similar to this effect. For example, if I want to interact with the spot, it requires a certain blade with certain skills. This would translate perfectly in a Pokemon game. Instead of requiring the HM move Dive, just require the player to have a water-type Pokemon, or a specific Pokemon that is established as an underwater guide. Maybe, when the proper requirements are met, it will give the player access to a huge, secret underwater cavern that has additional Galarian lore, maybe even some ultra-rare Pokemon. This gives power and agency back to the player, elements that have been absent in the Pokemon franchise for quite some time now. This proposal sounds both exciting and fun. It pains me to admit that there's nothing remotely like this found within Sword and Shield. Sword and Shield are the very first Pokemon games where you need to pay additional cash in order to access its online features. This is a fault of Nintendo, not Game Freak. Nintendo have always had relatively terrible online functionality, and the Switch is unfortunately no exception despite now costing a subscription to play online. Game Freak perfected online with the Player Search System, or PSS, back in X and Y for the 3DS. You had quick and easy access to your friends, if I had any, allowing you to establish trades and battles with minimal issues. The GTS was also just one click away for your convenience. Speaking of GTS, it was removed from Sword and Shield in order to monetize it in Pokemon Home, but we'll put that aside for the time being. Everything you ever needed functionality-wise can be found tied up in a neat bow on the bottom screen. Ever since then, online functionality in Pokemon games has been steadily regressing in quality. Sun and Moon introduced the atrocity known as Festival Plaza, a convoluted maze that obscures you from your friend list. You instead see your friends randomly in the overworld. I think you have access to a guest list, which is random people, I think. The fact that I don't even know how it works is a testament to how confusing Festival Plaza is. There's also a VIP list where I pick my friends from my friend list, due to it being difficult to connect with them because there is no friend list in-game to interact with. Game Freak managed to one-up themselves by making an even worse system than Festival Plaza. Meet Sword and Shield's YCOM and Stamp system. This system has completely foregone any list interaction and instead uses a confusing and messy stamp-based system. How do you find your friend stamps? I have no clue. It's completely random. There is no way in-game to communicate with your friends directly to prompt for a trade or a battle or to meet up for a raid. You need to establish communication outside of the game in order to organize and arrange a connection. The only way to connect in-game is via a passcode. Be careful, however, because if the passcode is not unique enough, there's a high probability you will connect with a complete stranger. The system is so insanely and unnecessarily bad, I don't even know how to properly express it with words. Knowing you have to pay in order to access this garbage just adds insult to injury. Trades are more or less the same as they have always been. Asinine connectivity aside, battles, however, have taken a massive blow with regards to 6-on-6. Pokemon Sword and Shield adopted yet another terrible Let's Go addition, the battle timer.
What? There's just no way. There is just no possible way. No. This game is fucking trash. Are you serious?
This isn't your typical timer. It gives you a total of 20 minutes, which seems generous at first until you realize that the timer counts down even during animations. It's not like a chess timer where each player would have access to a total of 20 minutes for their plays, where the timer would pause until the next player was able to make a move. It's 20 minutes total, animations and all. This means that it's an optimal strategy to run the timer with Assault Team to win. This change alone is incredibly toxic and has killed any motivation for me to partake in full-fledged battles. This is one of my favorite things to do in a Pokemon game, so my disappointment was immeasurable, to say the least.
If it says no restrictions, why are you restricting the time?
There's another online feature called the Victory Station where you partake in competitive battles in the Battle Stadium. The Battle Stadium utilizes the same tier-based system found in the Battle Tower, where you start at Pokeball tier until you reach Master Ball. There's only 2 modes for single and double battles respectively. Singles has you select up to 3 Pokemon, while doubles you can bring in 4. The semi-competitive mode is actually kind of fun, until you realize that almost every single battle is decided by Dynamax, resulting in each match feeling similar from one to the next, and paying enjoyment at a much higher rate compared to previous titles. Not only is the pool of available Pokemon significantly smaller, but the attack pool is also limited, with many useful attacks being removed from the game. This severely limits the number of creative strategies otherwise possible. The dens in the wild area allow you to raid with up to 3 other players online. Sometimes I had difficulty connecting to anyone. The game would just time out, being unsuccessful in its attempts to establish it. Once in the raid itself, the flaws of the battle system are more prevalent than ever. The gameplay slows to a crawl as you need to wait for each interaction to resolve, one at a time. This is exacerbated when weather comes into play, as each Pokemon weak to the weather is picked each turn individually. This adds up turn after turn and feels like most of this could have been avoided with minor optimized tweaks to the battle system. When you are online in the wild area, the frames dip substantially. You are able to see other players in the wild area, but there is no option for you to invite your friends to join you in the wild area, which is a missed opportunity. Overall, the online is terrible. It's an embarrassing mess when compared to the PSS, and Game Freak should honestly be ashamed. Beloved features were removed, and the player is constantly restricted and prevented from having fun at every turn. It's great that Game Freak has made a ranked mode much more accessible than in the past, but their gimmick kills a majority of the enjoyment after a while due to it being incredibly over-centralized. Connecting with friends should never be this difficult or inefficient. They streamlined this process in the past, so it's very frustrating being subjected to this terrible stamp system. The experience doesn't feel like a 2020 mainline Pokemon title on the strongest Nintendo console in existence at the moment. To conclude, Game Freak continues to play it extremely safe. 20 years later, the Pokemon franchise refuses to evolve, which is ironic for a series focusing on monsters that continually evolve to get better. Despite all of the cuts that were made, Game Freak was unable to capitalize on the additional resources granted to them. understand why Game Freak made the cuts that they did. It's a harrowing task to include so many different unique characters into a game that gets worse every subsequent installment. Sakurai experienced something similar with regards to trophies in Smash Ultimate. Trophies were completely removed, but a compromise was made where Sakurai dumped all of that development time into bringing back every single fighter from the game's inception up until Smash 4 on the Wii U. This is a fantastic compromise that I'm sure every single fan of the series would agree with. The trophies aren't even that important in the grand scheme of things, but Sakurai went above and beyond to ensure that no one would be disappointed by their exclusion. So what was the compromise for Sword and Shield? Keep in mind that the Pokemon aren't just random trophies, they're the lifeblood of the entire franchise, and over half of them were completely disregarded. Over 400 Pokemon, literally every single one being someone's favorite, were unusable in the game. Where was the compromise? The graphics? Well, no, because most assets, like models and animations, are completely reused, most of which are poor quality, let alone all of the awful textures found throughout the game. The online? Well, no, because the online system in Sword and Shield is borderline offensive. You get where I'm going with this. The overall game doesn't feel like the additional developmental resources gained from omitting over 400 Pokemon were invested elsewhere. I'm not going to pretend that developing a game is straightforward or easy. Issues arise all the time, but that's where Game Freak could have gained ground by being transparent with their consumers. Instead, it seemed like Game Freak was more interested in deceiving consumers. If it wasn't for the massive leak, no one would have known the true extent of the Dex cut. Most assumed that it would only be a handful of Pokemon. Game Freak also gave off this impression. I too thought there would be at least 500 Pokemon in Sword and Shield, so it came as a great surprise to learn that Sword and Shield would only have a total of 400, which is far less than what was available in Pokemon Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum that dropped over 13 years prior. At no point did Game Freak, or the Pokemon Company, express to the fans the true gravity of the cut. Game Freak made many excuses for the cut, like creating new models, and made promises like enhanced expression of the remaining Pokemon, and making adjustments to the battle balance. Instead, they reused all of their old assets, and they introduced one of the most broken mechanics to the series, accomplishing the exact opposite of what they promised. I understand the cut, but from what I see, the cut was not justified. No compromise was made, and instead consumers are expected to pay more for less, since Switch titles have larger inherent price tags attached to them compared to 3DS titles. The worst part is that Game Freak got away with murder. The sales for Sword and Shield are conclusive. They reveal that the consumer base is complacent with paying more money for less content. This sets a precedent where Game Freak doesn't need to put in 100% to produce a commercially successful Pokemon game. People will buy it regardless of quality. Why do more when you can do less? As a standalone AAA title on the Switch, and the first true mainline Pokemon title to grace consoles, the expectations were sky high. Many children dreamed of this game to come to fruition many years ago, but if I learned anything from recent beloved franchises, it's that reality is often disappointing. Pokemon is, sadly, no exception. They failed miserably to meet those expectations. There are signs of being rushed present everywhere, from the infamous mouse curses to the entirety of the wild area. It's clear that Game Freak were pressed for time, which is odd considering they only had to work with half of all Pokemon this time around. A majority of the assets for said Pokemon being reused from past installments. With all that being said, Pokemon Sword and Shield are bad games overall. Whew, that was quite the mouthful. This is my first in-depth review of this nature, so I would appreciate any and all feedback. What would you rate the game? Make sure to leave your thoughts down below in the comment section. If you liked what you saw, consider leaving a thumbs up. And if you want to see more, make sure to subscribe. I wanted to quickly mention that I launched a Patreon. I know we're all going through some hard times right now. There's no obligation. If you're willing and able to go the extra mile with additional support, I would be beyond grateful. I hope you're all doing well and staying safe. Thanks for watching.
Simply put, Sword and Shield are the best Pokemon games I have ever played, and I've played them all.
IGN are notorious for giving out wildly inaccurate review scores to games, usually accompanied by shallow reviews. Sword and Shield being a perfect example of both. Today we will be going over IGN's review of Pokemon Sword and Shield, written by tCAS-tRCD-tRP-tRAS, who has made the following statement. Pokemon Sword and Shield are the best games in the series, streamlining its most tedious traditions without losing any of the charm. Wow. This statement comes across as extremely hyperbolic. That's quite the pedestal to put Sword and Shield on, considering they have to compete with over 2 decades of other Pokemon titles. What does Sword and Shield do that's so much better than all the rest to warrant such high praise, and to justify a near perfect score? Let's find out. Very few things in life can make me as happy as a great Pokemon RPG, and Sword and Shield repeatedly left me in a state of pure, childlike joy. The elated surprise of not knowing what's coming is something this series does extremely well, if you can manage to play it relatively unspoiled. And I'm glad that sense of wonder is still alive and kicking in Sword and Shield. I'm not entirely sure what she's referring to here. If she's referring to the Pokemon, then I guess that makes sense, but you can say the same thing about any new mainline Pokemon title. If she's referring to the game as a whole, then the statement can be applied to any game ever. Of course you will be in for a surprise with a new game you've never played before that you didn't spoil. And even without spoiling Sword and Shield, you can accurately guess many aspects about the game because it plays out like every single other Pokemon game that came before. Sense of wonder is still alive and kicking in Sword and Shield. With every new game in this 23-year-old series, changes big and small are always made. Pokemon is one of the most stagnant series simply because it doesn't make big changes at all. But I've never been willing to declare the latest entries the new gold standard for Pokemon because they've consistently been a balance of better and worse. But the first mainline game on the Switch has changed that. Though there is still no perfect Pokemon game, the 40 plus hours I've spent with Sword and Shield have left me comfortable with calling them the best Pokemon games I have ever played. And I've played them all. First thing, she implies Sword and Shield are not a balance of better and worse, but lean more towards better instead of worse, despite its numerous regressions, which brings her to the conclusion that it's the best Pokemon game ever made. She's saying this in a world where Heart Gold, Soul Silver and the Black and White games and their sequels exist. She then heavily embellished the campaign runtime of Sword and Shield, claiming it's 40 hours plus. The game is anywhere from 8 to 15 hours. And that's being extremely generous. Final Fantasy VII Remake is an example of a 40 plus hour game, and Sword and Shield doesn't have anything come close to it. While this series has always been great about introducing new players with thorough tutorials, it seems crazy that experienced players have never been able to skip them until now. Just tell the NPC you know what's up and they'll get out of your way and let you get down to the business of catching and training. You can even catch Pokemon without being told how, and doing so automatically skips the tutorial. It seems crazy that it took over 20 years to implement mundane and basic tutorial skips, because that is crazy. The fact that this is used as a source of praise and some kind of incredible feat highlights the primitive state Pokemon is in. And perhaps most overdue of all, Sword and Shield have killed the sacred cow of the traditional random encounters that have all too often made exploring feel like a slog. Except that Sword and Shield didn't kill the sacred cow. Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee did. For some reason, Casey is attributing overworld encounters to Sword and Shield, and she does it several times throughout this review. She's perfectly aware that overworld encounters debuted in Let's Go, as she mentions it later on, so I'm not sure why she repeatedly credits Sword and Shield for this feature when it's borrowed from another game. It comes across as disingenuous and desperate to attribute significant achievements to an undeserving game lacking in them. Sword and Shield are extremely familiar and comfortable thanks to a pretty traditional setup. You pick one of 3 starter Pokemon and then head off across the Galar region to capture and train more, defeat 8 unique and exciting gym challenges, and become a Pokemon Master over the course of about 40 hours. Again, the campaign, which she alludes to here, is not 40 hours in length, not even close, and is incredibly misleading. Casey goes out of her way to assure the viewer that if they play this game, they're in for an incredible 40-hour journey, when in actuality the game is anywhere from 8 to 15 hours. In order to hit a 40-hour runtime, you need to be doing a lot of idling or useless grinding. You won't be clocking in those hours exploring because there is no exploration aside from the wild area, which is tiny in comparison to classical dungeons found in other Pokemon titles. All of this is the same old song and dance we've seen for the past 23 years, but Sword and Shield roll out some immediate and noticeable changes that make the whole thing just better. It starts with basic stuff. You can finally skip tutorials if you know what's up, and you can even start catching Pokemon before being taught how. This is the first instance of criticism brought up by Casey. Sword and Shield is basically the same as any other Pokemon game. It's quickly swept to the side, however, to once again highlight that basic tutorial skips have been implemented after 2 decades. It's a nice change for sure, but it seems a bit excessive to bring this up for for the second time in this review, and we've only just started. I thought I'd missed Sun and Moon's rideable Pokemon when it came to getting around the map, but Sword and Shield's Rotom Bike and Corviknight taxi service are so quick, easy, and seamless that they leave the old system in their dust. The Rotom Bike works across both land and water automatically, and the fast travel system is unlocked right after the first gym. Using it is as easy as checking the map and choosing a point to go to, with no drawn out animation involved. Your destination is just a brief loading screen away. I agree that the Rotom Bike is a nice addition and does contribute to streamlining the gameplay experience. She claims having no animation for flying is a positive, but the animation itself served to mask the loading screens. In Sword and Shield, since there is no animation, you're simply treated to a boring black screen instead, which I would argue is worse than the animated loading screens in past titles. Other than that, there's really no difference between Charizard Glide from Sun and Moon and the taxi servers in Sword and Shield. The awesome new wild area opens up within the first 2 hours. It's a large, open space enclosed by steep cliffs and peppered with groves of trees, lakes, and tiny islands. It's a little visually bland, but there are some decorative ruins to be found, and deeper within, a sandy area with huge rocks. A little visually bland is a huge understatement. The wild area looks super stinky and is by far the worst looking area in the game. She also embellishes the wild area to make it sound more interesting than it actually is. It's kind of sad that she needs to bring up the rocks that can be found in the wild area, because there's nothing to truly explore and discover that's as interesting as rocks on the ground. It even makes the distinction that the ruins you find in the wild area are cosmetic only and aren't areas you can actually explore. I was immediately struck by the fact that, for the first time ever in a Pokemon game, the camera here can be freely controlled with the right joystick. That may seem like a ridiculously basic thing to praise in a 2019 video game, but the freedom it offers really is that exciting for longtime players like myself. It's something I'd like to see in the entirety of the next Pokemon game. That's about as ridiculous as praising first-time tutorial skips in the 8th game in the series. I agree though that the controllable camera is a nice addition, and I hope it takes priority in the next game. The extra strong, over-leveled Pokemon wandering between and above tall grass patches are usually the most interesting, like a huge Snorlax on the other side of a bridge, or a Gyarados in a lake. But these are sometimes so high level you can't even catch them, since gym badges now returned in that cap instead of geographical barriers like in previous games. I once found a level 25 Onix when my team was only around level 7 and felt a little robbed, so I found myself avoiding these Pokemon until I'd earned enough badges. It's unfortunate that a cool new feature is deliberately avoided by players. Game Freak should have found a way for players to be rewarded for interacting with these high-level Pokemon, but balance around it to prevent it from breaking the game, to encourage people to interact with the feature instead of dodging it. While I can't speak for the online functionality, connecting locally is easy and intuitive. It's comparable to X and Y's player search system, but maybe even better. No, it's not better. It's actually significantly worse. To be fair, she's strictly referring to local connectivity, but even then, the PSS is much more intuitive than YCOM. For PSS, you click on the avatar of the person you want to interact with. For YCOM, you send a request out into a void until you're matched up with someone random. If there's many people around, you would be forced to enter the same code with the person you want to interact with, but make sure the code is unique enough, otherwise you will connect with the wrong person. You can see player stamps so you know when someone is searching, but you can't click on the stamp to initiate a connection, which is literally the opposite of intuitive. I don't see how YCOM is intuitive at all, or somehow better than the avatar system in XY. In the wild area, you can actually see other nearby players in your game, which is pretty damn cool. But unfortunately, there's a lot of latency and connectivity is pretty limited. Interacting with another player you see in your game only nets you a free item. If you want to trade or battle, you still have to use the trusty YCOM. This is another example of the lack of intuition regarding the online YCOM system. Instead of interacting with the avatar of your friends in the wild area to establish a connection, which makes perfect sense, you're instead forced to go through the crappy YCOM system. I had plenty of fun just progressing through the world of Galar outside the wild area. Though the roads aren't quite large or expansive enough to get lost in, that's what we have the wild area for. Its United Kingdom inspiration is evident from the architecture of the buildings and bridges, and even the geoglyphs etched into the hillsides. This is another example of Casey downplaying the negative aspects of the game. She conveniently glosses over the linearity issue accentuated by the routes by mentioning that you can't get lost in them, implying that they're straightforward, but fails to get into details before dismissing this criticism by reassuring readers that the wild area makes up for it, which it doesn't. She does this many times throughout this review. X is bad, but Y makes up for it. She's trying to excuse the cons via distractions by redirecting to the pros, which comes across as heavily biased. Battle music, on the other hand, isn't very memorable at all. The gym theme doesn't feel tense enough, though to its credit, it is dynamic. When your opponent is down to their final Pokemon, the music changes to include a melody carried out by the fans shouting from the bleachers. The transition is reminiscent of an EDM drop, but it lacks the weight and satisfaction that usually comes after it. Some of Pokemon's old music are the most memorable tunes in gaming history, and it's disappointing Gen 8 doesn't live up to those standards. Casey doesn't hold back any punches on this criticism. She's genuinely not a fan of the music, and she doesn't shy away from admitting that the music is disappointing, while still acknowledging that it's dynamic, which does contribute to making the experience better. I agree that the music from past generations is much better than Sword and Shield. In my review, I may have been a tad bit generous. The music is perhaps an okay plus, but I digress. The gyms, music notwithstanding, are delightful hybrids of challenges and battles, pitting trainers against unruly herds of Wooloo, puzzles, and more nerve-wracking fights, while also battling rookie gym trainers before finally reaching the gym leaders inside massive stadiums. Each of these challenges are wholly unique and memorable. These challenges aren't groundbreaking, exciting, or memorable in any way. They're more of a distraction as opposed to a challenge, as challenge implies the possibility to fail. The Wooloo challenge has no sense of urgency. You just repel the sheep until they get where they need to be. There's no time limit or no real purpose or accomplishment once you complete the minigame, as it's impossible to fail. In Twilight Princess, when you're herding goats, you're put under the pressure of a timer which heightens tension and presents an actual challenge for the player to overcome in order to be successful. The Wooloo distraction is nothing like this and is nothing more than an inconvenience. All of these gym challenges are like these. They're not challenging in the slightest. Like usual, the monotype gym leaders made it easier for me when I had decent counters and substantially more difficult when I lacked them. I really appreciated one in particular who was a nod to competitive play if I've ever seen one. Again, Casey points out how Sword and Shield continues to tread similar ground, alluding to a rare exception to the monotype rule in Raihan. I agree with her that the Raihan fight is the direction that Jim should go in, as his team is focused around his strategy as opposed to just having a team full of dragons. Instead of the trivial monotype trope that Game Freak has been crapping out ad nauseum, they should broaden their horizons and introduce new and exciting ways to structure a gym. Maybe have a team focused on big Pokemon, another focused on fast Pokemon, another focused around trickery, etc. Pokemon has so many different strategies and combinations of different Pokemon, it's honestly criminal to limit gym leaders to solely having one type which can be easily countered. Temtem introduced dual type gyms where one type covered the weakness of the other, and that change alone significantly spiked up the difficulty and was an enjoyable experience. Each gym leader and rival has guild cards too, with a little bit of extra info about each of them on the back. These side characters all are more fleshed out than usual, some with complementing character arcs, and even though these micro stories are certainly sides to the main dish, I enjoyed them all the same. Sword and Shield's overarching story, which runs parallel to your personal quest of conquering the Galar region's gym challenge, had a few twists that surprised me, but not enough time was spent on developing it to make it a marquee feature, as is usual with Pokemon. I was at least glad that there was more to discover about the story after the credits rolled, roughly 39 hours in. Casey claims Sword and Shield are the new gold standard for Pokemon games, but continues to criticize it for being exactly like every other Pokemon game. The game starts off and plays out the exact same as all the other games. Not enough time was spent on developing a compelling story, as per usual with Pokemon. Characters continue to lack emotion. The gyms are the same. The arguments do a poor job of convincing anyone that Sword and Shield is somehow the gold standard, the pinnacle of Pokemon, that rises above the rest and is essentially a carbon copy of all the others, failing to break the mold in almost every area required to propel it to such heights. The bar for a Pokemon game honestly isn't that high to begin with, yet Sword and Shield are still plagued by basic issues shared across all of the games, and fails to meet the relatively low standards established by past titles. Casey mentions the story as lackluster in passing, but fails to go into any substantial detail and completely glosses over the major issues entirely. And she again greatly embellishes the length of the campaign to deceive the reader into believing that the game is densely packed with things to do, which isn't the case at all. It would be understandable if Sword and Shield had side quests, an RPG staple, but the 8th game in the series still doesn't develop this feature any more than other Pokemon games, which further contradicts the gold standard assertion. There's some little things you can do for NPCs here and there, but it's not like they're tracked or implemented in any meaningful way. As for the League cards, that would have been a great way to introduce side quests. Instead of reading optional text to gain further insight about a character, you can develop them through optional side missions. Nessa needs you to help her grab something for her modeling game. Some could take inspiration from Twilight Wings. Bia goes missing in the mountains and you're tasked with finding her from her caved-in location. Little things like this go a long way and are infinitely more interesting than random cards that are given to you because the game says so. Nitpicks. Not very effective. This is literally in the review, in bold. She actually uses the term nitpick, which is the go-to deflective buzzword used by apologists and bootlickers on social media to dismiss criticisms they don't like. Keep this in mind as it comes up later. While Sword and Shield aren't among the best looking games on the Switch, the first mainline Pokemon games you can play on a big screen TV certainly don't look bad either. In fact, compared to previous Pokemon games, they look fantastic. I mean, in some areas the game definitely does look bad, like really bad. Let's Go, as terrible as that game is, looks significantly better than Sword and Shield and has a lot more polish and shine. Its art direction is more cohesive and attractive and has things like unique backgrounds and battles, something that Sword and Shield fails to match. Saying Sword and Shield looks better than the handheld games that came before isn't really saying much. And it's not like Sword and Shield look remarkably better compared to emulated Sun and Moon with adjusted resolution. Take for instance Luigi's Mansion 2 on the 3DS and Luigi's Mansion 3 on the Switch. There's a considerable, marked difference between the two, and you can clearly see that the Luigi's Mansion 3 team took full advantage of what the Switch has to offer. Sun and Moon did the same for the 3DS, but I cannot say the same for Sword and Shield. For Luigi's Mansion 3, you don't need to compare it to a 3DS game or a GameCube game to make it appear better visually than it actually is. Luigi's Mansion 3 can contend confidently with its fellow peers on the Switch for one of the most visually impressive titles of said console. I once again cannot say the same for Sword and Shield. And there's no sign of the frame rate stutter that was so common on the 3DS during battles. There is still noticeable stutter in battle when the screen is split, but it's a lot better in double battles for sure. Some of the new unique attack animations are really damn cool. They really stand out against some of the older moves, which can be stiff and plain. Some do look really awesome, especially when contrasted by the reused assets. Sword and Shield would have been much better off replacing the old 3DS animations with better looking animations, or at least update the old ones. Not too much to ask considering the significantly smaller pool of available Pokemon. And while the cutscenes are nice enough, I'm disappointed by the continued lack of emotion in not only your own character's face, but on those of your rivals and companions as well. The stakes of the story get pretty extreme, but your character is just mindlessly smiling along with it all. The animations can also be stiff, like they are in older attack animations. So while the graphics are undoubtedly the best we've ever seen in a Pokemon RPG, they still haven't quite matched up with the other RPGs on the Switch and elsewhere. On top of that, there's some noticeable pop-in of wild Pokemon and items, and other small quirks that still never disrupted play. All things considered, gameplay and charm are more important to me than raw visual pageantry, and those are qualities Sword and Shield have in spades. If Let's Go didn't exist, I would agree Sword and Shield are the best looking Pokemon RPGs. Not that great of an accomplishment, however, as the bar was subterranean to begin with. Here Casey makes valid criticisms towards the lackluster presentation of the game. The graphics are poor, the animations are lacking, and the cutscenes, those things that deliver story beats, lack responsive emotion, making the characters feel completely detached from what is happening on screen. These are some major points of contention, but Casey simply dismisses all of it because it's not important to her. Once again saying, X is bad, but Y makes up for it. Tiny things, like my team being healed automatically after each gym battle so I could seriously continue the story, being able to switch Pokemon out of the box and route, and being able to connect so seamlessly with others using the Y-Com makes a big difference when you add it all up. Earlier, Casey said nitpicks are not very effective, and any bit will dismiss a majority of major criticisms by equating them to nitpicks. But here she can be seen literally nitpicking positive, tiny things that make a big difference when you add it all up, while failing to realize that the inverse is also true regarding negative nitpicks. This is one of the main reasons why Sword and Shield are bad games. Major issues aside, Sword and Shield has so many tiny little problems that, in a vacuum, seem harmless and insignificant, but once all of them are added up together, they become a big problem in their own right. Verdict. Pokemon Sword and Shield are closer to my dream Pokemon RPGs than anything that's come before. I'd still like better cutscenes, companion Pokemon, the complete Pokedex, and a more visually interesting wild area, but nitpicks are just not very effective when everything else was just a complete joy to play. Wow. So let me get this straight. Casey here is dismissing lackluster cutscenes, over 400 removed Pokemon, and the ugly new addition that was one of the only interesting things added to the game as nothing more than nitpicks. She downplays all of these major issues and acts as if though they are insignificant and unimportant. She also once again says, X is bad, but Y makes up for it. This is the peak culmination of her extreme bias shining through. She continues, the way they respect my time is wonderful. And the removal of monotony from random encounters and other odds and ends distills it down to only the pure and charming fun of capturing, training, and battling wonderful creatures. And hey, if I'm missing any tedious repetition, I can always get back into reading. The game doesn't respect your time as much as Casey thinks it does. You can't even skip text-based cutscenes, which is the opposite opposite of respecting your time, greatly diminishing replayability and detracting enjoyment from players that are not interested in the lackluster narrative that Sword & Shield has to offer. One of Casey's highest points of praise is credit taken from a different game. Sword & Shield are not the first to introduce overworld encounters, even though Casey acts like they are. Some Pokemon you literally can't capture due to a ridiculous badge restriction. Most Pokemon you don't need to train because of the permanent experience share that trains them for you.
One of the biggest criticisms I'm getting about my review is like, oh, you didn't talk about any of the problems, the glaring problems that make this game broken. It's like, I didn't talk about any glaring problems because there aren't any glaring problems?
The IGN score finally makes perfect sense. We've unraveled the mystery. It turns out Sword & Shield are the best Pokemon games ever created, so long as you ignore all of its flaws. Casey omitted several major issues with the game. She downplayed a majority of criticisms throughout, and she dismissed the rest as nothing more than nitpicks. The only reason the game wasn't rated 10 out of 10 is because she really didn't like the music. I know most reviews are biased to some degree or another, but here it seems like Casey didn't even make an attempt. The game is linear, but the wild area makes it. The graphics are terrible, but the gameplay and charm are more important to me. The game has many issues, but it's okay because it's fun. Time and time again, she would excuse issues or downplay and misrepresent other issues while overemphasizing the positive aspects. The review is decently accurate if you remove all of the dishonesty regarding the game's flaws and imperfections, as well as toning down the embellishments and exaggerations of the praise. What did you guys think of IGN's review? Do you believe that Sword & Shield deserve a near perfect score? Make sure to leave your thoughts down below in the comment section. The Isle of Armor DLC drops tomorrow, so be on the lookout for my review of that coming soon. Until next time. Thanks for watching, you guys. So Isle of Armor is the first piece of Game Freak Pokemon DLC ever. In the past, Game Freak would typically re-release the exact same game but with some additional add-ons at full price. While the business practice is pretty scummy, it did introduce some beloved Pokemon features like the Battle Pass. What does Isle of Armor have to add for its $15 price tag? When you first boot up the game, you're given an Armor Pass which grants you access to Armor Island. Unfortunately, the entire island doesn't actually scale to your level, despite early reports claiming otherwise. It simply scales to the number of badges you have. This wouldn't have been much of an issue if this DLC dropped a few days after the game came out, but it's been a few months now. Most people at this point have entire teams of level 100, and all you need is literally one Pokemon at level 100 to run through the entire island. I simply use my tCAS-tRCD the entire time and had zero issues. The lack of level scaling is disappointing to say the least, and this leads to non-existent difficulty. Your first few steps on the Isle of Armor, you are greeted by a glorious, fully scaled Wailord in the distance, which is an amazing sight. A shame they are unable to render all Pokemon at similar distances, as the game would feel a lot more immersive with a more convincing world. That Wailord, to my knowledge, is the highest level of non-legendary wild Pokemon, sitting at level 80. Careful with defeating it, however, as I haven't found a way to make a respawn without creating an entirely new save. You are mistakenly enrolled in a dojo on the island, who is owned by Mustard, a mentor of Leon. What's bizarre is that none of the characters know who you are, or acknowledge the fact that you beat the unbeatable champion. When you defeat Mustard for the first time, he's surprised, and the people in the dojo even refer to you as a newbie and they don't recognize you, which is ridiculous since in the post-game of Sword & Shield you're referred to as the champion. I appreciated the acknowledgement of my accomplishment. All of that is completely gone in the DLC. This lends itself to the credibility of the idea that the content in the Isle of Armor is cut content from the original game, and is simply being sold back to consumers. After you defeat Mustard, you must start the dojo training regimen, which consists of 3 trials, and the person who successfully completes all 3 will earn the dojo secret armor. The first trial is a comical chase against obscenely fast Galarian Slowpoke. Unfortunately, the Slowpoke are locked into circular paths, so you don't really need to chase them. You just simply need to intersect with their loops, and they will eventually run into you. The Egg Thief from Spyro the Dragon back in 1998, over 22 years ago, on the PlayStation 1 had more sophisticated AI and would actively attempt to avoid the player to prevent their capture. After you defeat all of the Galarian Slowpoke, you take on trial number 2, which requires you to find Max Muscle, a secret recipe for Max Soup that grants certain Pokemon the ability to Gigantamax. The only hint to their location was that they grow in dark, humid places. obviously referring to caves. And that was it. Mustard walks off and leads you to it. I was actually impressed that the game didn't hold your hand past that, and was willing to allow you to explore the island on your own to locate the mushrooms yourself. Until Mustard remembered that he's in a Pokemon game, so right as you were about to play the game, he rushes towards you in order to hold your hand by showing you exactly where to go. Disappointing. The third challenge is a battle against a rival on the island. Clara for sword and that other guy for shield. Clara being the objectively superior option for reasons. Sword bros keep on winning. A neat thing about this fight is that Clara actually cheats. She lays out toxic spikes around your team to give herself an edge. This reminded me of the Leon Rumors pre-Sword and Shield release, where it was speculated that he was a phony champion who cheated his way to the top. Fun fact, on the back of Mustard's league card it says he quit the league long ago after the chairman at the time asked him to win a rigged match, which shares strikingly similar elements to the leaked pre-release Sword and Shield plot. Either a crazy coincidence, or maybe Game Freak had different plans for the story. We may never know. Either way, I appreciate Game Freak entertaining different approaches to battles, but sadly Clara's shady tactics were rendered obsolete due to my tCAS-tRCD, who is part poison type, absorbing all of her toxic spikes and brutally foiling her plan. Didn't make a difference either way since I was only going to use one Pokemon anyways due to the lack of level scaling, but amusing nonetheless. Avery's cheat tactic is much more effective as he lays out a psychic terrain that boosts his Pokemon's powers. I would appreciate more match manipulation like this in future content, as it can be a great way to flesh out characters and drive the plot. After you obliterate the rival's level 60 Pokemon into level 100, you finally get access to the secret armor. It's a new legendary Pokemon called Kubfu. You need to have Kubfu warm up for you by taking it around to various hotspots on the island. After you do that, you can finally challenge the two towers on the island, Tower of Water and Tower of Darkness, but you can only pick one. Doing so simply dictates what form Kubfu will take when it evolves into Urshifu. Darkness Tower grants you Single Strike style Urshifu, who is fighting Dark type, and Water Tower grants you Rapid Strike style Urshifu, who is fighting Water type. Both also have different signature attacks. The towers themselves are rather unremarkable. The inconvenience they present is that your Kubfu needs to be around level 70 in order to tackle it successfully. The Kubfu you are given is level 10, which is 60 levels under the suggested level. It's quite frankly a slog to grind up that many levels, even with the help of the new Experience Charm that serves to boost the mandatory experience share. I attempted to grind off of wild Pokemon until I realized I had a bunch of rare candy sitting in my bag. One weird thing about the island that felt off is that there are no traditional trainer battles. A neat way to get around the level grinding issue was to have you fight dojo apprentices littered around the island that gave you a massive boost in experience, but only if you had Kubfu alone in your party. Perhaps Game Freak failed to address this grinding issue because you were originally supposed to have Kubfu join you on your Pokemon quest and only return to the towers as post-game content, which again supports the cut content population. As for the towers themselves, they're virtually identical. The Water and Dark towers contain trainers with a single Water or Dark type Pokemon respectively. You must climb up 5 stories, each of which hold a trainer with a single Pokemon that you need to beat in order to advance. The final floor has Mustard challenge you with his own Kubfu. He drops his old man facade and basically goes Super Saiyan, which was really fun to watch. You beat Mustard again and are given the opportunity to evolve your Kubfu into Urshifu. Rapid Strike style Urshifu's signature water attack, Surging Strikes, is the single best animated multi-hit attack in the game. Most, if not all, of the multi-hit attacks aren't even animated, yet they went all out on this one and it honestly looks amazing. Single Strike's Wicked Blow is also very satisfying to learn. You return to the dojo to find that Hop has come to the Isle of Armor to further research on Dynamax as Sonic's assistant. This part of the expansion falls in line with the idea that the towers are post-game content, as it takes place canonically after you defeat Leon, once again supporting the idea that this content was cut from the base game. Turns out that Urshifu can Gigantamax as well, but hates mushrooms and prefers honey. So you go on a strange fetch quest where Hop licks unknown liquids off of your hair, like literally. Hop remembers that honey comes from bees, and so you head off to find some Vesper friends. But not just any Vesper friends, a Dynamax friend hiding in a tree that sucks you into a random nearby Pokemon den. Makes no sense, but okay. You beat it to get some max honey, allowing Urshifu to Gigantamax. Dojo Master Mustard then challenges you to a serious battle out back. You completely invalidate his entire team with a single level 100 Pokemon of your choosing, and that's the end of the Isle of Armor. Story-wise, it's equivalent to a couple of generic side quests you'd find in any RPG. It's at least more enjoyable than the Royal Twin postgame found in the base game. The strongest part of the DLC is the exploration aspect of it. This is how I expected Sword and Shield to be from the beginning. Having every single area be like the wild area is a precedent that I believe Game Freak has utilized going forward. If Gen 9 plays like Isle of Armor, it will be a very enjoyable experience. The island itself is significantly larger and way more interesting than the wild area in every way. It has actual biomes that are split up in realistic ways. You can find a large marsh, a lush forest, an isolated desert, and most of these are split up by an intertwining cave system that has various different exits. The entire island is surrounded by large bodies of water that are mostly explorable until you hit the invisible walls at the edges. Frames do drop heavily when moving from one area to another or when a weather effect becomes active. Some of the textures are certainly a step up from the wild area, but are still quite underwhelming in places, especially the caves. Thankfully, modders are able to inject more life into these areas to make the overall experience more enjoyable to play. A nice addition that promotes exploration is a mini side quest where you need to track down 150 Alolan Digletts for a dude that somehow misplaced every single one of them. At least they gave a somewhat reasonable explanation for why a native Alolan Pokemon found its way to Galar. The Digletts are basically Koroks from Breath of the Wild, but without any of the interesting puzzles, clever hiding spots, or creativity of any kind. The rewards for collecting them are the different Alolan Pokemon. There are a ridiculous amount of items spread out across the island, to an excessive degree, so much so that I just ignored them after a while. Every inch of the island is inhabited by tons of beloved species. One benefit of the Dex Cut is that when old Pokemon make a return, they feel new and exciting again. It's a joy to run around seeing tons of old favorites from past photos. Seeing a bunch of Sandal in the desert, Crocodile being one of my favorites, was a layman, and reminded me of the desert resort back in Unova, albeit significantly less interesting comparatively, as it's just a box full of sand. They introduced new move tutors that require new currency that teach new moves. Most of these moves are buffed to terrain styles of play, which is a huge boon for the impending Tapu takeover once Crown Tundra drops. You also get access to new hairstyles and clothes. The bike gets a slight makeover and now comes with particle effects, which are embellishments I could get used to. The new bike uniform is also less offensive to the eyes, even if it's still mandatory and replaces your customized clothing options. For the dojo itself, you can upgrade it by spending tons of your watts. Honey is kind of like a secret boss you can fight after spending a certain amount of watts, making a great use of that currency, and a nice treat for those who take the time to collect that large amount of watts that you need. They also added a way to use Apricorns via Cramomatic that gives players access to the Apricorn balls. Game Freak reintroduced follow Pokemon with the Isle of Armor expansion. While I like that the feature makes a return, it was implemented in the worst way possible and there are many glaring issues. First and foremost is that this mechanic is locked behind a paywall. I predicted as such back in January. Before we know it, we will need to pay for our Pokemon to follow us. You literally have to pay additional cash in order for your Pokemon to follow you, unlike Heart Gold, Soul Silver, and Let's Go, where you get access to follow Pokemon out of the box. And in those games, your Pokemon could follow you wherever you went. In Sword and Shield, the follow mechanic is exclusively limited to Armor Island. You can't have your Pokemon follow you anywhere else in the game except that one island, which makes no sense at all. Speaking of Let's Go, the follow system from Let's Go and downgraded it in every conceivable way. A large majority of the Pokemon are way too slow. Some Pokemon are simply incapable of reasonably following you at all. In Let's Go, when Pokemon fall behind, they put a neat little Pokeball animation. This helps to keep the feature consistent and enjoyable. In Sword and Shield, it constantly teleports to you, which is jarring and shatters immersion and investment in the world. In Let's Go, the follow Pokemon UI is seamless. You can select any Pokemon in your party to follow you at any time, anywhere, and it's trivial to toggle them in or out of their Pokeballs regardless of where you are. In Sword and Shield, only the very first Pokemon in your party can follow you, and the only way to toggle it on or off is to talk to this kid in the kitchen of the dojo. You also cannot ride any of your Pokemon like you could in Let's Go, despite how amazing that would be while traversing the Isle of Armor, utilizing its rotational camera. This mechanic was clearly fully implemented, with most of the innovations present in Let's Go removed entirely in Sword and Shield. It's a literal downgrade in every way. The follow feature seems like it was lazily slapped together last minute as additional padding to further incentivize and coax consumers into forking up that $30 for the expansion. They didn't have the player's best interest in mind when including it, otherwise it would have been tested more thoroughly and / improved upon for past titles. There's a new battle tower-like feature called Restricted Sparring that you can access from the dojo after you beat the Isle of Armor main story. It's a more restricted version of Battle Towers, hence the name, because you're forced to use Pokemon of the same type and you can only heal your Pokemon up to 2 times. They won't be automatically healed for you after every battle. Other than that, it's the exact same as the Battle Tower, except there's no Super Boss trainer, just the same 2 generic NPCs. It doesn't help that they are all completely invalidated by Dynamax. Even if you are restricted to a single type, Dynamax is so broken that the type restriction doesn't really matter in the end. They dropped a little bit of foreshadowing for the upcoming Crown Tundra expansion. Hop says that Sonya went somewhere cold, and Crown Tundra has been shown to be filled with snow. Mustard, after you beat him for the final time, alludes that they need to train together more often to become stronger, in order to be ready for when the time comes, and assures the player will know what he's referring to eventually. Maybe some kind of crazy threat or doomsday event will play out in Crown Tundra. All in all, the expansion so far is an okay minus.